If we could have a little quiet now, please. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Good to see you all. Thanks for coming. This is, just to make sure you're in the right room, this is the West of England Combined Authority Overview and Scrutiny Committee. In the event of a fire, please await direction from West of England Combined Authority staff who will help with the evacuation. Do not return to the building until instructed to by fire wardens. Can I remind you that this meeting is being live streamed and can be watched on the authority's YouTube channel? And please, can you use your microphones when addressing the committee? I believe there's a roving mic somewhere for people who want to make statements. Once you finish speaking, please press the middle button or the button with the little sort of person on to stop background noise being recorded and broadcasted. The minutes of the members of the West of England Combined Authority Scrutiny Committee are listed on the agenda. We have apologies from Councillor Tim Kent and Councillor David Addison. So, do any members have any interest to declare on any items of business? I'll take that as a no. I should declare that I also work for Sustrans as Director of the National Cycle Network, and I haven't yet encountered a situation where I've had a conflict of interest with those two roles. I would now like to thank you, Mayor Norris, for coming along and being open to answer questions from the committee. So let's get going. I'm going to use my chair's privilege and start. We've had a letter from the government, Best Value letter, which is disappointing but maybe not surprising. What are you going to do differently, Dan?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of things that need to happen. Well, I'd start off by saying, though, Ed, if I may. I'm trying to, but I mean, can you hear me now? Is that okay? Let's try that. Let's try that one. Okay, right. Thanks for that. Can everyone hear? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. What I start off by saying, Ed, really, is that these relate to, or this relates to issues quite some time ago, actually. If you look at the letter, it refers to the two dates in question, one over 12 months ago, one 18 months ago, approximately. And they were issues that were really live when I first arrived, to my horror and shock, if I'm honest. There was a lot of dysfunctional things going on. I don't think it's helpful for me in a public forum to talk about those, because I'm very keen that we talk in a way that doesn't draw attention to our region in a negative way, and yet that is what I'm afraid seems to happen. Other regions have equal challenges to us. Other metro mayors have similar challenges to us, but their council leaders and their councillors seem to have a regional focus that doesn't allow them to damage their region. And I'm kind of concerned that we are doing that by some of the things that we do and say. So what am I going to do that's different? Well, I'm going to, as always, do a reset. I think there's a great opportunity now because we clearly are going to have a different political leadership in Bristol, irrespective of the outcome of the elections themselves. There's going to be a change. We know that's coming. We've also had a year which has allowed the New South Gloucestershire arrangement to start to bed in, where you have joint leaders there. And there'll be a slight change in the way that's done as well, which is encouraging. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to reset and have hopefully a new relationship. But what I'd say is that whatever I do, and I will do my very best as I always do, I hope, but it does require other people to do the same. You know, relationships are not one-way things. You know, ask any couple in any relationship, they'll tell you, you know, that it's give and take, isn't it? And sometimes I felt that it's been a lot of me giving and a lot of other people taking, and I don't think that they probably think it's the other way. But the truth is we have to relook at that, revisit that, and I'm always happy to do that. And I suppose that's what I can say is I think it's a state of mind. The one thing I would say is it is kind of interesting that this has happened now, Ed, because the letter does refer to some of the good things that have been going on, the improvements and the openness and the transparency, which I'm very keen on and always have been keen on, hence me always attending your meetings whenever I possibly can and having a very good record of doing that. But what I would say is it is interesting that this notice is being issued now, and it's for others to speculate why that might be in a general election year.
I've got one other question, which is around the BSIP and the West, the demand responsive transport. And when we went through our task and finish group, we were given very clear assurances that ward members who faced a lot of complaints and therefore have a lot of intelligence about the boundaries and the way it's working would be involved in some form of review of the way it's working. I found out from your answer to David Bredgewell that in fact that's already been set. The new boundaries have already been set. As an effective ward member, I've had zero communication about this, and in fact it would appear that the West Local the West Link, services were registered at the end of January. So that's over a month. So this is kind of the other side of the same coin of really decisions being made, but not involving people who could maybe add intelligence and help to that.
Well, let me say to you, Ed, about that. I was in exactly the same boat because I was basically given that outcome. So I discovered, like you, that there was very little that I could do. And I've had very strong views about this, but actually from the outset. So the views that some of the things that are being implemented now and starting to change were things that I wanted to happen when the thing first started. So I'm afraid that there's a situation where officers are making calls where there isn't strong enough political leadership. And that's another reason where we need to get our act together as leaders, because this is what will happen if we're not doing our jobs. I'll be very candid about that. All right, so look, I'm glad that the smaller areas are going to happen because I wanted them all along, because I always thought it was odd that there would be journeys that you can make that were quite considerable, because the key to what's meant to be happening is in the name, isn't it? West Link, not dial a ride, not West dial a ride, West Link. It's meant to link you up with the existing public transport system. And that's not been happening in the way that we wanted. Now, it did get off to a very bad start. And one of my officers was, I think, recently asked questions about this and explained, there weren't enough drivers and various other things. All those things are true, not ideal circumstances to start, but we're bound by our relationship with the government and our agreement with the government when these things should start. Not ideal, doesn't make it work as well as I would like it to do. But let's be clear as well, this is an experiment. This is a way of evolving and learning from it. Now, I'd like us to learn not in year increments, I'd like us to learn in 6 monthly increments. So maybe we can have some kind of arrangement in 6 months' time where we revisit this prior to that period, because I'd be very keen to do that as well and see exactly what's going on so that politicians can have some say and influence. Okay?
Thank you. I hope to be around. Alison.
Chair, I have two questions for Metro Mayor, if I may. The first relates to the question I asked you at the last meeting of this committee on the 22nd of January. And it was in the context of the unhappiness with how BSIP has been rolled out. The fact that the last time BSIP was put as a subject on an advisory board, which deals with transport's agenda, was December 2022. It has been requested at every single advisory board meeting since that BSIP be discussed on those meeting agendas. It has always been refused for BSIP to be an agenda item. Now, I asked you about this at the last meeting. You said that you were open to requested items being put on the agenda where focused decisions were possible and papers had been put forward. And following that meeting, in relation to the next advisory board meeting on the 19th of February, a paper was put forward by Councillor Warren and a request was made for it to be put on the agenda, which was refused by your office. Councillor Warren came to that meeting, and given that it wasn't on the agenda, in the light of her having put forward a paper, asked for it to be discussed as any other business, and that was refused as well. Now, this is not quite some time ago. These are real problems which are happening now. Can you please explain why the advisory board, which deals with transport, has not had BSIP as an agenda item since December 2022, and you specifically yourself refused to allow it to be discussed at the February meeting?
Okay, well, thank you for your question, Alison. I'd simply say to you that I think the part of the problem is that Councillor Warren does like to talk about these things and does kind of make them arguments, I'm afraid. And I'm not interested in arguments. What I'm interested in is achieving things and delivering things. Now, BSIP has to be seen in a very wide context because it is complicated and it has lots of factors that relate to it. If you're going to talk about BSIP, you really need to talk about levy. And I'd like to have discussions about the levy with the leaders of the councils that are in the west of England. There's a similar reaction when I want us to talk about that specific as there is for mine when they want to talk or she wants to talk about BSIP. But look, I'm happy to talk about BSIP. BSIP's not a no-go area. It's just got to be done in a constructive and positive way, not in a silly party political point scoring way. So if you, Alison, can talk to Councillor Warren and get her to come up with a way that we can do that in a kind of civilized and proper way, very happy to do it. And that we take in wider areas as well as just BSIP, because it is very, very complicated. And I don't want us getting into, because what we end up having, Councillor Warren and I, is disagreements about facts. And I don't think there should be disagreements about facts. Facts are facts as far as I'm concerned. Now, my concern has always been that your council, Baines Council, has used the subsidised money that it's got for services, for subsidised services in your area, and used it in a way that I've not been happy with. So, for example, extending the subsidy to run just over a general election period, knowing that you're going to cut those services immediately afterwards, which I think is wrong, and I've been on the record to saying that. So I think that there is a scope for a discussion, because subsidised buses, for example, are important. But what I don't want people getting into is into the situation where they play sort of party political games, where they want to suggest that BSIP is to fund subsidised services, when actually it's the council's responsibility through the levy to do that. And that's what is going on. I mean, you've got drawn into it now as well, but that's what's been happening. Now, if we can, all the reports that I've been reading in the papers recently are getting it. They're starting to understand that the one responsibility for transport that local councils have is through their duty through the levy to provide subsidised buses for places where those services will never make a profit. In other words, there's social need, not profit to be gained. And that is important and right. But leaders in their wisdom, council leaders in their wisdom, I can't remember, 2 years ago now, 18 months, 2 years ago, decided to freeze that levy, hold it at the same level. And in that time, we've seen bus inflation go up at some points in the 40%. And if you've got the same money coming through the levy, huge inflation that is incredible, carrying on in the interim, that inevitably means that there will be bus cuts. Now, I get, as you heard me say when I think you last raised this, or someone else raised this in this meeting last time, I get that councils have got real challenges. You've got lots of statutory duties that you've got to meet. I really get all those things. And you are bound to turn to other places where you might be able to get some kind of resource. But getting help and resource through BSIP or anywhere else requires a kind of level of debate and discussion that is not party political point scoring, and is about the facts, agreeing that the levy is the responsibility of the councils, that has been frozen by them deliberately, and that has led to bus cuts. If we can acknowledge that, then there may be ways forward. And I hope, Alison, you'll be part of that and getting that point across, because we do need that discussion desperately. We really do.
Thank you, Metro Mayor. I think there is so much that's controversial in what you've just said, and this is not the forum to have a debate about it, so I'm not going to return on these points. That's not my role here. But in relation to my question, which is why the BSIP has not been put on the agenda of the advisory board, which one would have thought is the board at which major transport decisions ought to be discussed, including the how the £57 million ought to be allocated amongst the regions. I'm grateful for your confirmation, as I think you've just given us, which is that you have refused to allow that to be discussed because you felt that it was going to encourage a party political discussion, which, as I say, I think you will find will be hotly disputed. But that was my first question. The second question, if I may, Chair, relates to the Polton bus bid, which has just been put under West Local. And my question is whether or not you or your office instructed the WECA offices not to inform the Unitary Authority officers or members about the detail of the Polton bid. And the reason why that matters is because the only occasion on which the detail of the Polton bid was known to the Unitary Authority in which the Polton bus was to run was when it was announced in the press. As a result, the careful work that had been taking place in relation to installing a service in that area, which would have covered further communities, which are now not covered, which would have involved a viable commercial bus service with a commercial operator, cannot go ahead because this other bus route is going to take so many of the potential customers. And thirdly, it was discovered by the operator of the park and ride where this bus was destined to land and go to, that no arrangements had been made in relation to that bus being able to use the park and ride. So could you please confirm whether or not your office instructed WECA's offices not to inform the unitary officers and the members who knew about the detail of this area, anything about this bid until it was announced in the press?
Okay, thanks again, Alison. Well, look, simply, how would I know? I wouldn't know what officers were saying to anybody, would I? They're doing their job. They should be doing things properly. You should have raised this with me at the time if you had a concern, if you don't mind me saying, so we could have corrected it in time so that things didn't end up happening, so we could have altered them and adjusted them. But look, all I can say to you is that West Local is not a new thing. Are you aware of it, Alison, just out of interest? Do you know about what it is and how long it's happened? And I know you're a new councillor, but do you know about it?
I know about it now.
Yeah.
I've only been a councillor since May, but I think what I know about it is not relevant to the question I've asked you. Okay.
Well, look, what I'd say to you is you should know about it because you are invited along with other councillors, not just Baines councillors, but councillors right across our West of England region and parish councillors and others to come up with your own transport solutions. So that's what I would ask you to do, to think about where you think there may be challenges in your community to transport, where you might be able to find a way of doing this and sorting things out in a better way for the communities in question. Now, in Poulton, they've come up with their own idea. That is fantastic. It's gone through a careful analysis and looked at. I'm pleased that it's happening. It's due to happen very soon. There are other places right across the west of England that also put in bids, some of which have been successful, some of which haven't. That's the important bit of news here. Now, if you think that there are places that could have been included in that particular route, it's for those councillors to have discussions with me or officers about what their solutions might be. Because what I know across the west of England is because of its diversity, one solution does not fit every community. And therefore, this is why it was created. It was created at my insistence because I knew there would be places that would miss out no matter what we did, no matter what we offered. So we made this bespoke opportunity to allow local communities to come up with their own solutions, people power, if you like. And I'm very excited by that. I'm looking forward very much to seeing what happens in Poulton and how it works out. I'm obviously hoping it will be a success and in the other places where it'll be going forward. And I urge you and your fellow councillors, please tell them if you think they don't know. And all the other councillors here, please tell your colleagues about this opportunity to find a solution for local communities to get their own transport needs met. And I think it's a great idea, and I hope you will work hard to make it be successful along with everybody else.
Very briefly, because this is not the forum for a debate, but the relevant councillors who do know about this have been desperately trying to talk to you about this for the last year. And my question was whether or not your office embargoed the detail of that Poulton bid, which would have enabled them to have a sensible discussion about the entire area with the officers involved, and that was refused, and that's why I asked this question.
Well, look, all I can say to you, Alison, is that I invite every councillor to come to surgeries to meet with me. I don't know which councillors these are, but perhaps you could let me know, and then I'll check if they've been invited, because maybe they weren't. I want to be fair to them. But it has not been raised by many councillors in all the surgeries that I've held for other councillors. By me as the mayor, and as in terms of, you know, I think I'll leave it there because you're right, it isn't the time for debate. Yet we end up being in this place, don't we? Unfortunately. Okay.
Anybody else like to ask any questions? I've got one then about West Local, which is in Bristol. I'm aware of a local person who's got a good idea, has managed to team up with a bus company, but can't find, I'm sorry, it's not maybe the best word, but the vehicle in the absence of parish and town councils to take on that responsibility. So is there a bit of a sort of mismatch here between the urban situation in Bath and Bristol and the rural places where there's maybe a more obvious
Could you tell me a bit more about that? Because I don't quite understand what you're asking me.
So
explain, please.
Basically, you need someone to receive the grant and manage it, which can't be a bus company. Yeah. So this person has been looking at the Bedminster Town team, the Windmill Hill City Farm, all of whom say, well, this really isn't our bag. So there's no obvious sort of responsible agency to take this on. Whereas in, the two places that have got it, it's been very much the town or the parish council that's taking it on. So there's maybe a bit of an advantage in rural areas, which is maybe not a bad thing given the state of bus services in rural areas.
It's not unique to urban areas. That's come up in the outside areas too. And we'll have to think about that, because that may be a way forward if we're seeing that things are just not happening for whatever reason, being held back. But it's done because obviously what we want is it to be people powered rather than business focused powered, if you like. So, I've had lots of approaches by various bus companies, local ones, small concerns, frankly, wanting to take this thing on with a particular business objective in mind. And I don't have anything against that in principle, but what I want this to be about is solutions by local communities, however they decide to do that, whether that's through parish councils or other mechanisms. So I think we have to keep that under review, because I think there may be an argument for it, but let's see how this rolls out a bit more. Because we've got a limited amount of money at this stage. We may be able to get more in the future. I hope we will be able to if it proves to be a success. But our challenge is actually going to be, will we have enough money for the initiatives that are currently coming forward, rather than perhaps encouraging in the way that you're suggesting.
I invite any other questions from the floor. Jonathan, then Casey.
Thank you, Dan.
Share the mic.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we'll share the mic. My question's about Westlink. Actually, I think we all know that it perhaps isn't operating as was originally envisaged, or there has been issues with it, and in fact it doesn't operate at all in my ward, and I'm contacted by residents, and there is a demand for it. They ask me why it doesn't operate in my ward. How do you think the issues that we have with Westlink can be resolved in, and what do you think the service will look like in a year or two's time?
So, well, the straight answer is, in a year or two's time, it needs to get better, or we won't have anything, because it's a limited time period over which we've got this opportunity. So we need to grab it as best we can and make it work. The particular, sorry, can you remind me of your first point? What was your first question?
How do you think the issues with it can be resolved?
Okay, well, I think it's resolved in the way that is currently happening, although perhaps in relation to Ed's particular question, with a bit more political input. That I think that would help, okay? Because what I do think it's been is a bit prescriptive and a bit like, this is what was agreed with the government, this is how it's going to be, and that I don't think is flexible enough to meet all the different challenges our communities, including your ward, have. So what I hope is that we will have more political input that will then reflect the challenges and needs of people that we represent, and hopefully we can do a better job as we go through this. But just to be clear, this is an experiment, I'm afraid. It's not a tried and trusted, proven system that we can just parachute in and it works perfectly, sadly. It is an experiment, but that's an opportunity for us to shape it in the way that we want, which is why I've said what I've already said without repeating it again.
Casey.
Hi, mine is just a question about the letter and the fact that obviously these three very major, different from each other issues have been raised around the relationships, the sort of human relationships in the mix between yourself and the unitary authority leadership, but also this sort of lack of clarity around the strategic priorities of the region, and then the constitution. And I understand that indeed the election coming soon may help shake up and hopefully improve the first. And obviously it's super early days for you to have an answer on this, and there'll be the panel set up, the improvement panel. But do we have any sense yet, can you share with us around constitutional reform and around clarity on the strategic priorities? What is the sequencing? What might be the time frame for the end of that process? And how will scrutiny, councillors, and even the public sort of have sight of that and contribute even to it?
Okay, right. There's a lot of questions there. Okay, I'll do my best to go through. I just made very brief notes. So let me say, in terms of scrutiny, I am in a very unusual position in the Metro Mayor role, in that the scrutiny that I face is made up based on the proportion of what happens in your local council elections, not in my election. So I always am scrutinised by a team of councillors that I'm always in a minority of in terms of party politics. And that means that that does not help us work together. So, for example, in Parliament, all the committees that scrutinise MPs or behaviour or whatever it is will be made up in ratio to the general election outcome. And we don't have that. So we do need to deal with that, because it's a bit like me saying, right, for all you councils, we'll make sure the scrutiny is made up based on my election result, where I got nearly 60%. So all the people asking questions, nearly 60% of them will not be your party and will be doing party political stuff. So we need to take that out of it. I think there's a way we could do that if we agree it. I think that would help. Then in terms of the strategic thing, well, we do need a strategic thing, but the strategic thing needs to be that we recognise as a fundamental principle, we recognise that if we work together, we will get a bigger cake, which we can then distribute, but the distribution won't necessarily be pro rata to the populations of each of the councils. At the moment, it's a bit parochial. So what people say is, well done, Dan, you got some money, although they rarely say, well done, Dan, they just say, got some money. Bristol say we want half, South Gloucester say we want roughly a quarter, just slightly over, and Baines will say we want a quarter, even though it's slightly just under. And that isn't the way that we will get a bigger cake, because actually we get bigger cake by having good ideas. And then when we've got those good ideas, we've got to, position them. And I may have said this to you already, previous question, Katie, when you've asked, but, a good example of that is money that was obtained under the previous mayor for, I think it was Park and Rides. And Park and Rides really, I think, clearly should tend to be around the big populaces. And yet we've got one right next door to the council offices in Yate, which is not where it should have gone. And that was divvying up. That was a classic example of divvying up and wasting money, in my view, because it wasn't using the resource that had been won by the previous mayor in the most effective way. That's what we've got to change, I think. And then in terms of, did you say the Constitution? Yeah, I find it crazy. And people may be surprised by what I'm about to say, but I find it absolutely crazy that in an area, the west of England, where the Conservatives are the challenger in many of the areas, that I don't have any single dealings with them now, because there's no Conservative leader. That seems a bit odd. I think we need to have, and the Green Party, I don't have a dealing with anybody in the Green Party, yet you have a presence too. So I think that's kind of crazy, because if you want people to work together, you've got to make sure they've all got a bit of a say in things. And at the moment, they do not, because our Constitution is designed really to make things very difficult. And it wasn't helped by the fact that it was shaped by a council, North Somerset, but then at the very last minute dropped out. So it influenced how it was going to be. And then at the last minute said, we're not coming in. And that has been the spanner in the works that's made everything so difficult. If they just said at the outset, we're not going to be in it, and had known that and had been clear about that, and perhaps they didn't know it, to be fair to them, perhaps it was a decision late in the day. But the trouble was that their influence shaped the Constitution that is not really fit for our west of England region, because we don't have North Somerset in it now. And that has not been helpful. So we need to revisit that. And I also think that we've got a voting system where each of the leaders has one vote, the three council, the entries, but Bristol makes up half the population. So Bristol people lose out in a way, and that is madness. So there's all sorts of things that need to happen with the Constitution that I think could be really, really helpful. But we've got this very difficult situation where it needs unanimity for change. And because we are very balanced politically in the west of England, it's quite hard to get that unanimity, especially if people perceive it not in the interests of their party. So again, the party politics thing keeps coming back. Now, some councils, in fairness, try and focus on the issues. Others don't. They want to be party political all the time. But we have to find a way through this, because it's in the interests of our region. And I think most of the politicians actually see that and understand that. But we've got to translate that into a constitution so that we don't go at the pace of the slowest, and that we don't go into those who want to play party politics. We go into the, we go with those who want to get the best for our region overall, and accept that sometimes the cake isn't always going to be perfectly sliced up, but actually, because it'll be a much bigger cake, we'll all be the beneficiaries wherever we are in the west of England. I hope that answers your question. You asked quite a lot.
Mike. I think this is going to probably be the last one.
Okay, this is a couple of comments and a quick question. I mean, you mentioned that Westlink is an experiment, and if an experiment didn't work, I'd stop it and rethink. And we seem to be just carrying on in trying to tweak the experiment rather than actually rethinking it. Going back a couple of years, I was trying to convince North Somerset to use the local community transport as a DRT experiment. And then Westlink came in. But now we have West Local, which seems to me should have come before Westlink in the way that it works. And it's been offered to the local community transport to become part of West Local. Only the local community transport comments are that it's a huge amount of work they have to do to apply for this money, probably beyond them, although they have the facilities to actually do the service. And even if they get the money is not allowed to be able to support the community transport itself and must only be spent on Westlink. And I wondered whether there's a question there of looking at the way the money can be spent, because obviously if you're going to have a Westlink, a West Local service operated by community transport, then one needs to support the other.
I don't disagree with anything you said particularly. It does need to be more simple. Everything that the combined authority does, and indeed unitary authorities does, I think needs to be a lot more simple. I think we are not good at making it easy for people to take up the opportunities that we're able to create, especially in difficult times where people are so pressured, running their businesses or holding down a job or juggling lots of different things. It's a really, it always amazes me how complex we make things, and I'm always striving to simplify. But on the other hand, you do have to balance that with being careful, because obviously, part of you'll be the first in this room to be challenging me if you thought the money was not being used properly and wisely. Absolutely rightly too. So it's getting that balance. And so we will evolve that as we move on. If we see that there are particular types of community or certain places across the west of England that are not applying for this, then we'll need to think. Clearly, we are not doing this well enough, because we should reasonably expect that all communities in all places should make roughly the same percentage effort to get,
I think with the current situation with a lot of unitary authorities and funding and balancing budgets, I think community transport across the area is under quite a lot of threat with lack of funding and funding being dropped. So if West Local can be made simpler in the way that it's have to be applied for, and then that will be benefit the community and community transport and creating a West Local service. But I think it needs some attention.
Okay, well, I don't disagree. I think that you're right. I hope you'll bear with me as we see how the first tranche works and learn from that, because we'll learn something as well from those who've been rejected, because people have made applications that haven't been successful. And we need to look at why that's happened, and is that in a certain place and what have you. It will take time. In terms of your experiment point, well, look, we've signed up to do an experiment for a certain duration. Now, it could be that we see it such an abject failure. We could argue that it's so terrible we aren't going to do that. But I don't think we're going to do that, because I still think it has some benefit to some communities across the west of England. But what our challenge is at this time is to make it better while we still got time to see it out and adjust it. But as you heard me say to Ed, look, I think we should hopefully be looking again at this maybe in 6 months or prior to that as politicians, to try and nudge it in the directions we will want, because I'll probably have views, maybe different to you, I don't know, but I'm sure we'll all have views, and I'm sure some of those views will be good things that will help it be a success. And I think we should make sure we incorporate those things in it, if that's okay.
So thank you, Dan, for coming just now. I think we all agree that the combined authority is the vehicle to try and get what's best for our region. It needs to be based on really very clear priorities, and I'm still not quite clear how we're going to go about developing those clear priorities. But I do hope that the new that there's going to be a reset, and the new City Council model of a committee system, which will bring much more transparency and openness to the way decisions are made, will help change, maybe reset that culture as well. So thank you. Last time you came, you were kind enough to stay and listen to the public statements, and you even responded to one of them. So I was hoping that you might be able to do that again today. So I'm going to do a bit of agenda management. We're not going to do the minutes right now. We're going to skip straight to items from the public. We've had 6 questions submitted by members of the public, and written responses have been provided and are available on the website, and I'm sure most of us have had a quick look through those. We've got 3 statements received, and I'm just struggling to remember the order. I think David Redgewell had the first statement, and Mayor Norris is kind enough to come and listen to that, Dave. So, Dave, we're going to set timer now for 3 minutes. So, time to have your say.
Obviously, I'm here as a representative for your bus service improvement panel, representing passengers. I'm finding it hard, Dan. I need a bit of help. The last panel meeting finished 25 minutes early, and we didn't get the full list of bus service changes. We've got to have the bus service changes to the panel so we can make decisions as passengers and stakeholders, including Baines Council, to make sure that we've got the right network. I've been fighting rearguard action with the chief executive of First Group now, and I think we need to meet first urgently with the officers. Doug's great. We've lost the bus in Avonmouth, a major route from Bristol through Sharhampton and Seamills and across through the port and then across to Avonmouth. That's withdrawn on the 8th of April without a replacement apart from 3 or 4 times a day. That is like a bus desert now, and Don Alexander's very upset. The Port Authority is upset. I could have dealt with this had we had this to the panel, because we could have pushed back. I mean, I would have contacted you that night. Sorry, I'm not going to say how I contacted that, but I'd have been in touch that night. And I'm disappointed. That said, we've got some good things. We've got Ashton Vale's bus services back. The fact they went to Meg Harper and they've got a best value review may say something about the passenger groups going direct to the Secretary of State, who's a local MP. But that's good news. We've got buses back in Albury Court. We've got buses in the Chew Valley. And yes, I'll put my hands up. I was heavily involved in Poulton. I do apologise to Councillor Sarah Warren. I didn't get to the full council meeting. Otherwise, we would have discussed it there that night. I was fully engaged in it. And no, it was a Poulton Town Council bid. And we worked on it. And I was engaged heavily in it. So, and the other thing was no commercial service off by first. It was 179. Doug was going to do some back trips to do some balancing work. And we'd have brought them back through commercially, but they wouldn't have put a full service in. Now, we can still have that conversation. Doug wants a conversation about the network with your officer's chief executive urgently. Please, that can happen. So we can look at gap filling and enhanced quality partnership. Stagecoach want the same, and so does Transfora. I'm in touch with them all, Dan. As you know, I contact you about these operators. So we're filling gaps. We're getting there. We've got to bring the bus network back. That's our biggest problem. That's what's causing us our best value review, because we've got gaps, huge gaps. Radio 4 are onto it this week. They're going to be doing a piece on best value at WECA. Not what I want to hear, but that's what they're going to do. We've got to resolve the bus network, and that's urgent. And the panels have got to be done. I can't understand when Councillor Hannah Young rings me and says she can't chair a panel. That's not acceptable, Dan. You need to look at that. She's a Labour councillor. She's North Somerset, which obviously wants to join this authority. I don't care. Sarah can chair a panel meeting if it helps us. It's just a case of making sure politicians do the chairing. They're elected, officers are not, and they should not be chairing panels. Whether we have I'm going to put this on the table, you can look at this, Dan. Whether we have a transport-focused civil servant from Manchester chairing our panel, that's another issue. But we've got to make WECA work. There is some good stuff happening. We've got to get the buses right. We've certainly got to get local trains right and accessibility. And please, Dan, can we have an equalities officer appointed by this authority, by the chief executive before he leaves us? Thank you.
Qualities officer, sort it, please, Richard.
I think we're actually out to advert at the moment. If not, we shortly are. I know the post was approved at the committee that Dan chairs, and the other councillors all voted for it. Yep.
Thank you. I'm Bath and North East Somerset Cabinet Member for Climate Emergency and Sustainable Travel and Baines Transport Lead on the WECA Planning, Housing and Transport Board. I've submitted a long statement. I'll summarise some key points. My main theme is that WECA has consistently failed to work with Baines, overspending the £57 million bus service improvement plan budget, resulting in poorer outcomes for our residents and poorer value for government money. Secondly, I want to ask for the scrutiny panel's assistance in ensuring that in the coming months, Baines is treated by WECA as a full and equal partner in shaping the June BSIP resubmission to the Department for Transport, because this will influence expenditure and outcomes in relation to bus services for our residents for the coming 5 years. It has become usual practice that Baines officers and councillors learn of developments in the expenditure of BSIP funds for the first time through the press. A recent example was the bid by Poulton Parish Council under the West Local scheme for a bus between Poulton and the Odd Down Park and Ride. Now, we have expressed our concerns about the principle of West Local, a scheme whereby local communities work with bus operators to design a service since we first heard of it in November 2022. We believe our expert bus officers have a better overview of the needs of the wider community and can design a better service for all that will provide better value for money. Nevertheless, the decision to go ahead seems to have been taken by WECA a year or so ago, although the decision notice was only published on the 29th of February, a couple of weeks ago. We're told that combined authority officers were instructed not to share any details of the Poulton bid with Baines officers or councillors or with neighbouring communities regarding the proposed bus or its route until the press announcement on the 20th of February, although design had been underway with Poulton Parish Council for the previous 7 months. This failure to collaborate means the chance of a commercially viable service serving the same and more communities has just been lost. Whole communities south of Bath still lack a bus service, particularly impacting the elderly and vulnerable. No consultation took place with the owner and operator of the Odd Down Park and Ride, which is Bath and North East Somerset Council. That has been publicised as the terminus of the new bus route, with no thought given to legal or logistical issues this might present. It's not yet clear whether the service can in fact be realised as it has been publicised. In this context, it is wholly unacceptable that BSIP has not been on the agenda of the Planning, Housing and Transport Board since December 2022, and that the Mayor has declined repeated requests for its inclusion. I hope that your committee can help to change the approach and behaviour of the combined authority in the future, and in particular in the preparation of the June BSIP resubmission to Department for Transport. Many thanks for your time.
Sarah, good to see you. I hadn't realised you were there. Look, I don't think I can add anything to what I've already said, but look, I think it's down to you and me to try and work a way forward. Now, you can come to public meetings and you can make announcements, but really nice if you came and saw me. You did ask me for a special meeting once, which I allowed and did have with you. I don't think much came of that, even though you requested it and we had discussions. So maybe we can reset that and make that happen again and see how it works, yeah? Okay, fantastic, that'd be good.
Thank you, Mayor Norris, very much for coming and facing this. I think the key word of the morning has been reset, hasn't it? So we look forward to how that plays out over the coming months.
Well, thank you, Ed. And can I just say reset is a two-way street, okay? Because look, it's the people here will want to suggest that it's a reset by me. It's a reset by all of us. Relationships are two-way things. Thank you.
Okay, shall we move on to the minutes of the last meeting? So are we happy to agree the minutes of the last meeting? Are they a correct record? Are we agreed? I think I'm getting nods all round that we're agreeing those minutes. We do also have an outstanding issue of the minutes of the 8th of September, believe it or not. I have spoken to Tim Kent, who sent his apologies. I spoke to him this morning. We discussed the minutes. There was two different options. One is that my preference is the contested minute should read, Councillor Tim Kent was also present to speak to his statement, was advised this was not allowed on the public forum. He was, however, invited to speak to it at agenda item 11. That's what happened. Tim prefers he was invited to speak as part of the public forum, but was prevented from doing so. And I think that's an incomplete record of what took place. So I'm going to propose that the minute that is in the minutes stays, which has the second part of that. He was, however, invited to speak to it at agenda item 11. Are we? Would anyone like to take issue with that, or should we agree those minutes with those words? And I have specifically spoken to Tim today, and he said he was okay. He wants to let it lie. So I think we'll move on if that's okay. Thank you. Right, I just thought it would be worth, in the interest of transparency and openness, because we had an informal scrutiny meeting which wasn't broadcast to the public, just to give a very brief recap about what we heard about. So we heard about how carbon literacy and accounting can be embedded into the combined authorities decision-making process and will be included in the body of committee reports, and also how it will be considered globally across the authority and its constituent councils. I particularly look forward to that because I think it's extremely important that when we're building a lot of things that we're very clear about the embedded carbon implications. We also had a red, amber, green rating against the 18 principles for good mayoral combined authority scrutiny, according to the protocols, 18 scrutiny protocols introduced by the department, DLUC, in December 2023. And as part of this, we have arrangements for a new task and finish group looking at the constitution. Now, all the more important due to the best value letter. And we also have heard about arrangements for audit and scrutiny members to have access to information via a SharePoint site, which is one of the good practice protocols. And thank you to Ben for suggesting that. We also started to look at an action plan for getting all of those 18 protocols to green. Good. And lastly, we heard about the delivery assurance program. We're going to see some of the outputs of that today, and we're beginning to see some outputs from it. I think we heard about joint training across all of those involved in delivery, and that is very positive, and we await the results of this. We also have an internal audit that's been commissioned to look at the delivery assurance and how it's performing. So that was what we heard at the informal group. Since then, there's been 2 advisory boards. Alison Streetfield-Jones and I have attended one each as advisors. Please make it known to me if you'd like to attend one of these meetings. We are invited to send 1 scrutiny member as an observer. Some members of me have raised concerns. Some members have raised concerns with me about the accuracy of the mayor's statement that he had not been aware of a request to discuss BSIP at the Transport and Housing Advisory Board, and suggested this required further discussion at a scrutiny meeting. I've made it clear that if anyone wants to pursue these concerns, I think it's a code of conduct issue, and I don't think scrutiny has the powers to investigate this. Okay, so now let's get on to the next part of the agenda. I now invite Marcia Daniels, Consultation and Engagement Lead Officer, to give us a presentation to the committee about the citizens panel. Hi, Marcia. I'm not sure if you're able to put that on the screen.
Yes, Nicola.
Oh, hello, Nicola, as well. Marcia, we all received your presentation on Friday, so thank you very much for that pre-work. I think there's a lot of detail in there about how some experts who you've commissioned have made sure that this is very much sort of, as far as possible, kind of balanced in terms of all the different kind of indicators you might want. So I think it's pretty clear from the presentation you've done an excellent job of making sure that it's balanced. So I recommend, I think we're probably most interested to hear the output of the panel, and if you scoot over some of the inputs and how it's set up, that's probably my steer for you in making the best use of the time.
Apologies. Introduce myself first of all. I'm Marcia Daniels, Corporate Communications Manager. And Tom Chibo is actually from TPX Impact, who actually ran the event for us, okay? And because they ran it as independently as possible, okay, Tom will be able to answer any questions specifically about how they ran the day to arrive at what the emerging themes that have arrived as well. And then also Nicola Phillips, okay, is from our transport operations team, okay, who will be taking that forward. So really my part of it's actually going to be quite limited because you've already said you don't want to hear about it. Yeah. So, okay, so if we whip forward.
Do whip us through the, just do show us, but I think we want to sort of quite pacey, and then we really want to hear about the outcomes and some next steps and,
No
and
problem.
what we've learned.
Well, obviously the whole point about the Sisters Panel was actually to do it in a general sense rather than any specific services. So that when we actually recruited people, it was all around, it's not to be talking about individual services and that actually it was a wider issue basically. If we just carry on a little bit further, we went through 3 agencies. TPX Impact was selected. If you pass on to the next one as well, mainly because they had a huge amount of experience in running similar panels of a whole pile of different clients, including unitary authorities in our area. I will pass on a little bit further. The terms of reference, I think you've seen all of this, and the question we were there to talk about was how do we decide which bus services to fund? Quite a narrow question, but that was the advice we had from TPX, that within the short period of time that we had, you would be able to spend a lot of time actually focusing on that one question. If we made it wider, it will make it more difficult to get outcomes. I think really that's reiterating what I've said already. To say that each panel member would be reimbursed the living wage for their time and also travel expenses. If we carry on through. Carry on. The recruitment, which I will zip over really quickly, was done by an independent company, Sortition Foundation, who actually are really the gold standard for actually doing this sort of thing. And if we carry on, we issued 12,000 letters. That was done to a random selection of postcodes. We had 309 responses. Sorry, is there a question there?
Chair, are you inviting panel members to ask questions in the middle or all at the end?
I think it'd be better if we just whip through the presentation.
Right.
We have I think we have all had a look at it. Well, certainly we've had it in advance. So let's whip through the presentation. I'm allowed about half an hour for this. So I'm hoping the presentation will be about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have maybe up to 20 minutes of questions.
No problems
Thank
whatsoever. Okay, well, this is how we did. I said that we had 309 responses. Okay, we go on through. And in a moment, I'll show you some pie charts to actually show how we made sure that it was actually representative of the West of England. There's 8 different criteria for the demographics. All of them followed the ONS data, apart from 2 where we gave more priority to rural representatives. We increased it from 12.7% to 25%. And also we ensured that people would, we had more bus users in it as opposed to people who hadn't used the buses. If you carry on the next one. So these here show you, okay, the first column shows you the target, which is basically how many people within our West of England area come within these criteria. The second one was what the makeup of the respondents was. The third column is basically our initial selection, and the fourth column was because we did have some dropout, basically the people who actually attended the panel. Obviously on my age, gender, ethnicity, disability, education, geography. We went to the UA level, okay, but no further. And these are the 2 where we made changes. None of those made changes at all. You can see that actually 25% of the panel were made up of people defined as living in rural areas, and the bus usage was split from never use the bus right through to frequently use the bus. I'm just going to pass over super quickly to my colleague Tom, who's going to talk to you through how the days were.
So these processes are designed to ensure that members of the public, regardless of their background, their interest in politics, their life experience, can participate in helping make a good decision. So we invested all the time of the first day in basically making sure that people really understood what they needed to know about bus services and the kind of wider context they were entering into. So we had a range of presentations, panel discussions, and short lightning talks to kind of stimulate people's thinking. And then the participants had some time together to talk about and reflect on what they've heard in light of their own experience as a resident. And on this slide, you can just see the kind of the themes that we looked at and the organizations that our speakers came from. So we had a mix of sort of presentation from the Combined Authority and an operator to kind of frame the context, what is, what our bus service is about, how do they run? And then we had a range of speakers that captured many of the different facets of why public transport is important and why bus services need to be funded. So the idea was not that these represent every single type of bus route, every single type of place, or every single type of issue, but they're there to give a sample of the different sorts of issues that are worth considering to then feed into conversations that the participants have. And at the end of day one, having received all of that information, had lots of conversations, a range of different themes started to emerge that the participants felt were worth prioritizing and worth thinking about more in the next session. So here they are listed. And then on day two, we got to work kind of starting with those emerging themes, thinking, can we make some clearer priorities and some clearer direction that transport officers at the Combined Authority can use when it comes to making decisions and selecting criteria for what services to fund. And we did that in a participatory way. So basically the participants got onto themed tables, examined each theme, reflected on what they'd heard, reflected on their own use of bus services, and then tried to sort of nail down more specific guidance around each theme to give clarity, basically. And then to be even more helpful, because obviously if you ask people kind of what's important and what they want, they tend to create really, really long lists and everything's important. But obviously you've got limited funding, limited time, and you've got to make decisions. And so we've asked participants to rank their sort of the criteria, the emerging themes, and we're using sort of gold, silver, and bronze as a way to indicate that.
Hello. So we've got some emerging themes that have come from, as Tom just mentioned just now, we got the panel members to rank them into what they thought was most important all the way down, that they were given some stars and dots, just so you're all aware. So stars were obviously their most important thing, and then dots they felt is their second important thing. So then we put all of them together, and these were the top 5 ones that we've had here. So would you like me to read through them, or you can read the screen? I don't. Look at you. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Then we've got the next 5, which we put into a silver category. And then our remaining 8, which are in bronze. I don't think there's anything. I think the next one is outcomes. So we've got obviously our outcomes and next steps. So our colleagues in TPX are working on the final criteria and the notes documents to share with us. So we're already working through all of the things that you have just stated there to see what we can do and how we can start moving that forward in a way that we can use it in a meaningful way for our bus services. As you all know, once we start getting, you've got lots of information. I will say one of the things after day one, there was 113 things that everybody wanted. So as you can imagine, getting it down to this, it's been really good. So they did work really hard at getting everything down, sorting out what they felt was important as a region. So now it's our job to take that away and actually start looking through that and building upon it and seeing how can we put that into something to support bus services going forward. Is there anything you want to say?
No.
No. I was going to say just at the bottom, I noticed obviously it says that it's going to be published online with all the lovely videos, so you can get to watch me if you really want.
That's it. Thank you. How are you going to actually go about this? Because that's a lot of priorities. There's already an existing, privileged to hear how you'd gone about prioritising the supported bus services last time round, Nicola, at online meeting a couple of years ago, before there's some really drastic cuts were made. How confident are you that you can kind of maybe take all these on and possibly blend with some of the existing things? Because it looks like quite a job.
Oh, it's definitely quite a job. I'm confident. I'm always confident. I wouldn't be doing this job if I wasn't confident. But yeah, there are quite a few things I will say that goes back to what we did 2 years ago when we were looking at all of what we felt as officers should be our priorities for looking at bus services. So you will find quite a few of those we already look at anyway. What's good to try now is actually match everything that our residents want with what we can do with backing data. So the Office for National Statistics has quite a lot of data that we use anyway. So it's going in and looking at what data sets we have readily available that we can use to link through to the priorities and build on those. I was going to say, I noticed you've obviously gone through some of the asks. Obviously, there was one I know around education, there was one on safety. There are certain things that we will have to work with yourselves as the highway authorities to look at, because it's very difficult. We do not have those powers. So there are certain things in there that will be a bit more challenging and a bit more difficult, because we're going to have to work together as partners to do that. But yeah, I'm confident we can do it.
Alison, did you have a question?
Yeah, I actually had a question about the subject which Ed said we weren't interested in, so it is why I wanted to raise this earlier on. And this isn't a criticism of the way you've done this or anything else. It's more of, I think, a proposed learning point as to, if you do this again, something to bear in mind. But in relation to the rural communities, and I've come from Bath and North East Somerset, so we have very large rural communities. A lot of those areas, buses have been pulled because of the supported services, etc. This is all old history. It's all very difficult, and we all know about this. But actually, what happened with your citizens panel is, I think there were 8 out of 40 people that came from Bath and North East Somerset. And although you recruited from BA 1 and 2, as I understand, you didn't recruit from 3. Had you spoken perhaps to the Unitary Authority transport officers, they could have said that BA 3 is Radstock and Midsummer Norton, which is very populous and very deprived. So, and because you are focusing on bus using areas, these rural areas where the bus services have been removed may not have been fully represented, which is a shame. So it's just that if you, as you were invited to do, could have spoken perhaps to the Bath and North East Somerset transport officers, they could have assisted with that, just to make sure that that particular group was included, to make sure that it was a little more balanced. So I'd say it's sort of criticism. It's just perhaps a learning point that would have been something that might have been helpful to you and to the unitary authorities to do.
Can I come back on that, if that's okay? Actually, I believe we did send a number of letters to BA3 and BA4. I would have to check that exactly. But I think that there was differing responses from different areas. And I believe in some areas our response rate was something of the level of sort of 2.4. And again, I have to check the actual details. But in one particular area, a couple of rural areas in Bath, the response rate was actually far lower. So I'm going to check whether it was BA4 or BA3. But in one of those areas, I think we had something like only one person responded. And Sortition, because they selected it independently, did not select that person because they had other people that fit that criteria. So it wasn't that we deliberately didn't select that area, it was what the response rate we had. Also, just to say that I think that we did have people originally in the original response from, for example, Peasdown St John, or I can't remember exactly where it was, but they were represented rural areas, and we did have 2 dropouts, which was most unfortunate because they were both from rural areas in Baines. And it was too late by that time to bring in someone in reserve. Although actually I would take that as a learning. Actually, I think that we could have had a reserve list. I do think I would take that on board, definitely. But I don't think it was a deliberate thing. I think it was just how it happened.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is just to reiterate the selection method, sortation, is a democratic lottery selection. So essentially what happens, 12,000 letters get sent out to randomized addresses. And so while we can you can make decisions about whether you want to weight the responses in a particular way or veer away from the sort of ONS statistics for each place. You can make that decision, but we don't basically try and select individual wards or places in that kind of way. So sometimes what ends up happening is you end up with something which is demographically fits and it works, but a particular ward, a particular neighbourhood, a particular place isn't represented in there, and that's in a way by design, because you're looking at the overall demographic criteria. And we did, as much as the time allowed, we did get in touch with unitary authority officers as well to advise on the process as well. But yeah, it may have been a shame that certain communities weren't in the room, but actually there was no way in which we could ensure that all communities could be in the room. And it was important that we weren't thinking in terms of, can we make sure that these particular places are in the room? The important thing is making sure that overall the room reflected the population of the region, which it did.
Any other questions? This is Katie.
Thank you. Just a really quick one. I mean, it's just such an intriguing and great process. Well done. And I guess what I'm interested in, I mean, there just seems to be so much sort of lived experience and knowledge coming out that's, informing these really interesting priorities. How much of a sort of overlap, and how surprised were you or not by the sort of overlap with what are, existing priorities for the team, and how will you weight something that might have just come around the corner that you'd not expected?
So I'm just going to, quite a lot of them were the same. I was just trying to pull them up to see whether there's anything that was something that was, I suppose the one looking around how high, I think, around the age came. That came second highest. We always look at that one, but I don't think I would have expected it to come so high as a priority as it has done. Enterprise zones were on there. We look at that anyway. Trying to think incentives for providers. That was one we don't normally look at. But I'm just going to say quite a lot of them is everything that we already include and already try to cover on everything. So yeah, only the one or two that kind of came as a bit of a surprise. But otherwise, just like this on the day with the panel, they got to ask. I was there asking and answering questions, so which was really helpful, because then you got to see how they were thinking about things and why they wanted it. Because it's all well and good. Yes, from an officer, I do use the public transport. I see it obviously slightly differently, probably to everybody else, because I work in it as well. But it's really good to hear from everybody. And that is our way of finding everything out. Because I always say to anybody who talks to me, we're not going to know everything out there in the region. We can't be out there for all services at all the times. So their feedback is key to making sure we get these things right. But yeah, really only a couple of things. Otherwise, everything we did. Oh, sorry, Tom.
And in the process, we made sure that we basically didn't present participants with this is how this is the right way that things should work, or this is how we do things already. They had free rein to put in whatever priorities they want, to rank them how they wanted. We worked really hard to make sure that we weren't kind of unfairly loading it. So that
they did ask that question on the day, and we said that we weren't informing them because we didn't want to sway it for them. We wanted them to come up with their ideas and everything like that. So we didn't influence it anyway.
How?
So as a statistician, I'm a little uncomfortable with the numbers. I mean, it seems to me it's like a form of focus group. Excellent for getting the issues out, but I would be a bit suspicious of the ranking. And I wondered if you had some literature that you could supply me with, because I guess you're doing this all the time, that would give us some idea of how representative, how reliable that is in making decisions, so that we've got some feeling.
Well, short answer is yes, we can share more about those priorities and where they came from. I think it's worth talking about the purpose of so there are different types of deliberative and participative methods you can use to basically bring the public into decision making. at different scales and different numbers, and they all have pros and cons. In this case, it was 40 people from across the region looking at a fair and quite a narrow question. And the power of this method is the depth at which the public engage with the issue, think and talk together, and come up with something sort of cohesive.
Right.
It is not an attempt to say that 40 people is a high enough number that you can be certain that everything that they come up with is supported by everybody in the region. It's a representative group, but the real power of this method comes in the quality of the facilitated conversations, the deliberation. You end up with better quality responses, basically. So each of those priorities, they're voted on by 40 people, but we think that's fine because of the quality. There are other methods you can use to understand public opinion. You can do quantitative research, big surveys, polling, things like that. However, the weakness of those sorts of methods is that they don't give people the opportunity to engage in depth with the subject matter or with each other. And in the time that people spend together, they are listening to other types of experience. They are understanding the issue from different angles. And the evidence, nationally and internationally, is that people's opinions and the way that they express their needs does change slightly when that happens compared to just an opinion poll. So the short answer, yes, we can share more information about the nature of the conversations and what they came up with, but we are not trying to claim that this is the same thing as an opinion poll of 1,000 people. It's a different type of method which has its own advantages for these sorts of difficult and challenging questions.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a very simple question, if I may. So you sent out 12,000 invitations and you received 309 responses. How does that compare with what you would have expected to receive? I just think that could be an indicator of the priority that residents attach to this process.
I think it was slightly higher than you'd expect. Sortition said that they would normally expect about 2%. Okay, so I think actually this is slightly higher than, and I think that they said it was a good response.
Yeah. So Sortition said it was a good response. 2% sounds really low. There are all sorts of factors and reasons why people do and don't respond to these sorts of things. They're relatively new sort of democratic exercises. So a lot of people have never heard of this sort of thing, although we do supply information in the invitation about what this is. But they are new. They do require time and commitment. So people would have had to come along on 2 different weekends, commit to kind of absorbing the material, thinking deeply about it, that sort of thing. And the dates may or may not work for people individually for various reasons. So when you add up all of those different factors, 2% is actually really good as a response rate.
Thank you. Yes, that's interesting actually, because obviously people have got lots of different pressures and priorities. So you wouldn't expect a particularly high response rate for any survey, but as a comparison, it's useful to know that this one was, if anything, slightly above what you were expecting.
Yeah, and there are some things that we did, for example, like over sampling for areas of high deprivation. So there's evidence that shows that basically when you send out a blanket set of invitations to something, areas of more deprivation, the response rates are always just a bit lower. So we can kind of oversample to make sure that we made sure that those areas where there might be additional challenges are well represented.
Yes, thank you very much.
I'm not sure there's any other questions. So I'm going to abuse my privilege and ask one more, which is one of the top priorities was 1 service per rural area. I'm not quite sure what a rural area is. And given the intense pressure on the budgets, do you think that's, it's great to hear that you're confident that you can take all the criteria and put them in, but actually the reality of the situation is the budget probably just won't stretch that far. So I'm not sure what 1 service per rural area actually means, and how realistic is it anyway, given the budget?
As you've alluded to, our budget is very tight. And yeah, I think I can guarantee that our budget will not be able to cover probably 0.1 because there just isn't enough money when it comes to providing bus services at the moment. Per rural areas, one of the things we did actually talk to them. You'll see they were thinking of more going out and then coming into your hubs. So if you had the rural area, say the villages around Yate, so you'd pick up around there and then go into Yate. So the same as you would have basically the little villages kind of, and then popping it into your main hubs, and then they would then transfer onto your main network that you've already got existing. So it wasn't trying to be sort of one individual bus to each individual little. Could be one bus that could cover a rural area and then bring them into the service. But I will say, as you know, we do have quite a rural area that would be a lot of buses, and we probably couldn't afford to do all of those things. So yes, it will be challenging, and I think the budget unfortunately will not stretch that far.
And I guess that's where Westlink steps up, isn't it?
Yes.
Is to get people into those hubs from villages. Can I say thank you very much for coming along? What I was particularly impressed by when I read it was that, and I speak as a transport professional myself, how little transport professionals were engaged in this, and how much actually it was the health, education, young people, and actually the people with the lived experience, because transport is derived demand. And this is a perfect example of actually hearing from people from where the demand is derived, health and education and everyone. So that was very positive to read. I think we're all eager to see what comes out the other side, but realistic that actually probably the number one is going to be very difficult to achieve, and we hope that Westlink will be part of that picture. Thanks very much. Thank you. Shall we move on now to Phil Wright, Transport Operations Programme Manager, to give a presentation to the committee about the bus service improvement plan. Now, we've got this list. So let's let you get settled in. So do you just quickly want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Bob Scowen. I'm interim head of transport operations, Combined Authority.
Hi, good morning. I'm Phil Wright. I'm the Bus Service Improvement Plan Programme Manager.
I'm going to suggest the same thing again, if that's okay. Whiz through the presentation. I think we're kind of quite interested, maybe less in the decisions and more about how they were taken. We accept that they're done under delegated authority with a very wide-ranging delegated powers. But I think we're very interested to know kind of what the outcomes of the decisions or the impact of the decisions is going to be. So I think that's something that we'd really like to focus in on. And I'd like to remind everyone in the committee, I think we've heard today a lot of frustration about the way some BSIP decisions have been made. And I'd like to remind everyone this is an officer presentation. Some of what we've been talking about today is politics. Some of it has been quite controversial in what's been said. So any concerns or frustrations about the way of working or the governance we may have heard in light of Councillor Warren and the DLUT letter and everything else should be reserved for when we look at the delivery of the transformation programme, because it's really this. Officers are doing the best they can within the circumstances, and I really want to focus in on the outcomes that we're hoping from the bus service improvement plan. I'd also like to hear a little bit about, particularly about as we're moving towards June and the deadline for effectively a reset, to use the word of today, of the BSIP programme, how unitary authorities are going to be involved in that as well, if you're able to talk about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. As you said, I'm going to give a fairly high-level overview here. I will touch in on the background to the governance because I think it's really important just to set the scene for that. Obviously, given some of the conversations that have taken place today, I think that'd be quite useful. By the way, hello. I know quite a few of you here. I've been met with quite a few as well. So, just a quick timeline. I think it's very important just to be clear on this. When we submitted our West of England Bus Service Improvement Plan, it was in response to the national government's national bus strategy. They asked us to deliver a plan, which we developed across UAs. All UAs were involved in the development of that plan. I was part of that working group with lots of us feeding into it, and it was developed as a policy document, which then became a bidding document, which.
More to the mic. Get it towards you, right?
Sorry. And that, in some ways, created some blurred lines and maybe wasn't as helpful as it could have been. However, we did take that to joint committee at the time in autumn 21 and ahead of submission, and we were successful, which was great news. But as ever, we didn't get as much money as we thought. So we had to go through a process to refine that bid. That did go to committee, went to full committee in the summer in July 22. And the bid was approved, and we were given delegated sign-off to crack on, because it's a revenue programme, and it is a true programme. It's got a wide range of initiatives being delivered within it. And if we were committed to the committee cycle, that would have been very challenging to continue to deliver that. We went through the process in the autumn of 22 and into early 23 to set up the governance process. We just wanted to make sure we included stakeholders, including the highway authorities colleagues, to make sure that we set this up and ensured we got the best input we could into the programme. The other thing I want to be clear on with this is we still have to work with DFT approvals processes. They ultimately say whether we can deliver something. They are the ultimate arbiter for this. It is not for us to make that local decision. We have to remember here as well, it's a joint with North Somerset. So if we make a decision, North Somerset have to agree with that decision. So it is a fine balancing act of trying to ensure that we deliver what we set out we needed to deliver, whilst keeping everybody's views considered. And obviously that's challenging because we have a wide range of views from across the region, and we have to come up with a balanced approach to that. And that sometimes means people feel they're not getting what they want, but it's not necessarily other people are getting what they want. So it's a difficult one. It's a difficult balancing act. The other thing I want to reiterate with this is that Highway Authority colleagues are included within this programme. We have a monthly BSIP programme board, which is a slight misnomer because ultimately the decision-making powers doesn't lie with that board. But what we use that board for is to inform the development of initiatives, get input from the UAs, which we do. That board's been running for well over a year now. We've also held workshop sessions with the UAs where we've dived deeper into the initiatives within BSIP to help to shape them, going back to late 22 and continued right through to December 23. So we have those meetings where we just dive into initiatives, we put challenges out, we get input, and help to shape it. But ultimately, the way we make those decisions is through what's called the directed decision notices. And I know that I've specifically asked to bring 3 of those to this meeting, which I'll talk about briefly in a minute, which then get on to what we're actually delivering. But just with the DDN's perspective, we do have to do some work to get those DDNs to a shape where we can fully understand what we're aiming to deliver. And then we will make those public once we've got those approvals through the delegated sign-offs. Just the other thing to be clear on here is that BSIP programme is 22 to 25. So we this time next year we'll be entering the close down phase for this programme. It is not an ongoing, long-running programme. We got clear deliverables, and we need to deliver that. So just quickly running through these 3 recent DDNs, which I was asked to bring, just to show, I guess, the wide range of the programme and the process we deliver and what ultimately we're aiming to get from this. Passenger experience DDN is quite a broad range of actually not a lot of money compared to the wider programme, but I always say this is probably one of the most important ones. It's about how do we ensure that the journey that people are making on a bus is more coherent. Real-time information, the system we know has got some faults, doesn't always work. How do we make that better? I hesitate to say perfect. I don't think we'll ever make it perfect, but how do we make it better? How do we make it so people can easily and comfortably get on a bus and do that? The way I've framed this, and sorry if some of you may have heard it previously, you're thinking about getting the bus sitting at home to getting on the bus, getting off the bus the other end and knowing where you're going. And it all works together as a coherent process. I think we can all accept that that's probably not where we are at the moment in the region. So how do we make that better? So I think that's really important. It's also about informing people of that as well. So there's a whole raft of work here within this one DDN, which is about a whole raft of different things, such as procuring individual products and rolling them out onto the highway, but also producing information and materials that we get out to the public. So it's a wide range within one DDN there. The other one is the marketing and communication activity, which again I think is really important, because the one key element of the BSIP programme is about getting more people onto the commercial network, taking the pressure off public sector budgets to fund that network, and ensuring that we don't start to lose, the downward spiral of bus services. We want to get out of that spiral, want to get on an upward spiral. So part of that is how do we align the programme to make sure we start telling people about the good stuff that's happening at the moment, the fares offers, the services that we've provided, and get people out onto those buses, get more footfall, more people using them more regularly. So I've just done some snapshots there of some of the promotional work we'll be delivering over the but I could have given you a whole long list here, but I just wanted to do some snapshot around, how we're promoting the birthday bus offer for the remainder of its life till the end of July, the promotion of Westlink, how do we get people to understand the system better, how to use it better, the changes that are happening, but then also get the patronage levels up as well. And then there's the bus services we've delivered through BSIP, which are along key corridors. How do we get people, tie that together with the fares offers that we're delivering to get people to use those services? So that we are hopefully taking the risk away that they'll be lost once the BSIP funding ends. And then the last one, I think, it was talked about earlier, so possibly the most controversial, was the West Local one. And I guess I just wanted to just really go down in a bit more detail here about the work that the officers do and have done to date on this one. In March 23, we opened ourselves up for expressions of interest, and these were advertised across the region. There was a press release went out. I think it was just before the election campaigns last spring. There was a whole raft of meetings that officers were going out to meet with interested parties over the summer and autumn. Took a lot of legwork. As you can imagine, a lot of people had some ideas but needed help with that. So the officers were out there helping them. We had an officer workshop in the October where we did have officers from across the UAs, and we had expressions of interest in place at that point. So they were presented to the officers, discussed some of the challenges. Then we put ourselves through a formal bidding process. Now, the bidding is due to end at the end of April. As I said, the money's only got another year left to run, so we can't keep this open indefinitely. So we went through that bidding process, and we got the first lot of bids in early. We had 4 bids received in early January. We did present the DDN to the BSIP programme board just before Christmas, so officers got a sight of that. And then we had the initial services which were launched, which the CAM Summer Valley and Chew Valley services. But we have got those other 2 are being worked on in a level of detail at the moment because they weren't far away from being successful. We just weren't there with them. So we're intending to get those and others in a place where they're ready to be launched later this year. We do want to ensure that we review those services on an ongoing basis. So there will be a commitment to work closely with those organisations on an ongoing basis. And we can extend this, and I think I've explained this to you before, but just to be clear on this, the FT said we can extend bus services into 26 because if it gives us better value for money to do so. We obviously just want to, and quick nod there to my audit colleagues, to chair of audit, we want to make sure obviously we get that better value for money from these services as well. But we don't want to just give the money with a commitment we will do this. We want to review them on a regular basis to make sure we are still getting that value for money. And then there's a couple which have been advertised fairly recently and we're still working on, which is the rollout of regional transport brand. The West branding, some of you will have seen it. It's out on West Local at the moment. We're working with the operators at the moment to put costings in place to roll that brand out onto the bus stops. We're working with Highway Authority colleagues about rolling that brand out onto things like the flags and timetables on the bus stops. So that's one that we've got a bit more work to do on before we get it to a place where we're comfortable with it. And as I talked about earlier, the fares package 3, we've got the fares packages, which are really going to be about how do we grow the patronage levels on those corridors. I don't think there's any real controversy attached to those. Highway Authority colleagues are fairly comfortable with them. They think that's a good way to use this money for the final year of the programme, is to grow that patronage levels. So all we're doing is sort of ticking box, getting the I's dotted and the T's crossed before we'll get that one through approval. And then just talking about something right at the very end, which was something that came up earlier as well. As was flagged, we've been requested by Department of Transport to do a refresh of the policy document, which BSIP is built on. As I said, it ended up being a bidding document rather than a policy document. So this is the opportunity to revisit that and turn it into more of a policy statement. The very clear message at the moment is there is no funding attached to that whatsoever. Which is probably won't be a surprise given the fact that A, there's not a lot of money knocking around, and B, we're entering general election season, if not sooner rather than later. So we got given, anybody who's worked with DFT before, I know that the chair has, they always give you crazy timescales rather than giving you the time you need to do this properly. So we were told in January that we needed to do this policy refresh to submit by the 12th of June. And if we do not submit by the 12th of June, we will not get year 3 funding of the BSIP programme. So it is one of the requirements for us to deliver this to enable get that funding. The one thing that the guidance sets out clearly, it does have to go through the enhanced partnership process. I don't want to drag a whole different conversation in here with our enhanced partnership, but highway authority colleagues, bus operators, a whole raft of other stakeholders are on the enhanced partnership process. So they will be part of the help to develop this and make sure we get to a place where we are comfortable with it. There are meetings going to be taking place as well with individuals within highway authority. I'm reassuring you guys as highway authorities, the intention is we will have cabinet leads and officers as appropriate sitting and having one-on-one conversations, detailed conversations. We talked about an hour and a half sitting down with them to go through those discussions about what their aspirations are to go into this. So that is starting to take place over the next couple of weeks. So you will start to feed into that process. And we will go back. The EP process, just to let you know, is early May. So there'll be that works quite well for us, really. We can go through this process in early May, do any last minute refinements before we submit on the 12th of June. That, just to be clear, is setting us up for any further funding that may become available post, I guess, general election. So we're in a place where we can start to look at what that future funding may look like and what we want to focus on delivery on. And that was a quick whistle-stop tour through the programme. So I guess I'll take any questions.
Thanks. I mean, I think it's a real juggling act to review the whole of this in 6 months and still keep all the partners and appropriate partners involved and happy. So that's going to be quite a thing. And I'm going to have a cheap shot now. I think we're all hoping that the new regional brand won't feature any faces or dogs. Any questions for Phil or Bob? Alison and Hal.
Very nice to see you in person. We've had so many through the BSIP deep dive task finish group meetings online. So it's thank you for being here today. It's really helpful. It was really to sort of follow on through from those task and finish group meetings that we had. And I know you've got a lot on. I know you're very, very busy and you're all very stretched and so on. But if we're going to be effective as a scrutiny committee, as we discussed at the time, part of that role is oversight. And that means learning about things and monitoring things as they go along. So we were going to have monthly information. We were going to receive the KPMG report from you, which was, I think, information that would help us to understand. We were going to receive the 3-month and the 6-month review. I know you were doing an overall review of the demand responsive transport system. We were going to have monthly information dashboards, etc. I feel we're little light on the information that you were going to provide us with. I don't sort of suggest that it needs to be formulaic, but I think if we're going to be able to work together and help and be effective as a scrutiny committee, we do need to keep this learning process going. We do need to see those reviews. And I was expecting this stuff to be coming through and it hasn't yet. So I'd be, without any criticism on it, Couches, I know you're very busy, but it would be nice to know that that is going to continue on so that we can work together.
Just a quick response. Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of things have become very clear. We started to share our programme report, which I appreciate is a very dense technical program management document. So what we've been working on over the last couple of weeks, and you're right, Alison, we are very busy, but we are almost there with it, is trying to put together the data in a way that shows the effectiveness of what we're doing. So we'll have updates on Westlink patronage levels, for example, bus services across the region. And we intend to have some a commentary that will front end that to explain what's happening, what we're doing, what's the next steps. So I'm hoping I'll be able to have a version to share with you in the next couple of weeks, and I will share that. Happy to take comments on it as well from the wider group to ensure it meets your needs. I'm trying to do something that I can use in multiple places, and I think I know you understand that. So whilst hopefully it will meet your need and will be a far more accessible version than the ones we've shared previously. So apologies that I haven't been able to articulate and feed that back to you, but.
And it'd be great if we could see the KPMG report and the 3 and 6 month reviews as part of that as well, if possible, please. Hal.
Looking at the project F3, F4, your travel guides, journey planning, and journey information and all the things you're going to do, are you worried that you're going to change the whole thing next year and a lot of this will be redundant effort, or is this going to actually be able to move smoothly through some kind of revolution, which is probably what you're planning now for the June submission? Is really, is it kind of an image of what things are going to look like? Two questions there.
Yes. Hang on, let me just make sure I answer both of those. I don't think what we're going to submit in June is not going to be a radical departure from what we are now. It will be an update and refresh from where we were 3 years ago, from when we did this. But we are still working on the core network. Just that there is a piece of work taking place at the moment, which Highway Authority colleagues are involved in, is something called Assess West, which is looking at what and I think I've talked about it previously with the group here, the next 20 years for the bus network looks like. That is due to report about the same time as we're submitting this bid. The challenge I've got is trying to make sure we articulate that in the bid.
Right.
Sorry, I keep saying bid. It's not a bid, a refresh to the policy document, because that will be where we all have an agreed vision for what the network should be. And the simple ask might be, government gives the money to deliver this network.
Yeah.
I'm simplifying it massively there, but that's what we.
That was the second question.
Yep.
The first one was, is all this work you're going to do on the passenger information, is it going to have to be completely refreshed again and everything changed?
No, I mean, I guess the level of reassurance there, our core bus network and where we're promoting services is not going to fundamentally change from where we are. It will adjust, and we will adjust it when we get more clarity on what that network looks like. So we will adjust it as part of this program and then feed into the next phase of the program as well. Yeah, I mean, obviously want to make sure we don't waste money.
Yeah.
Hi, this is sort of following on from my questions to Dan earlier. Forgive me if I'm wrong here, but the rules seem to prevent community transport from applying directly for West Local. Community transport seems to me in the best position with its knowledge and experience of running something like West Local, yet they're excluded from applying directly unless they have a partner to create a new service. Is that correct? And the problem with that is if you get CRT coming in to do a new service, they'll probably use their existing vehicles to run it. So to have to separate the two is actually impossible. So I wondered why those rules were there to effectively stop community transport being part of West Local.
Okay, so community transport is funded by levy funding and not BSIP funding. And the West Local bid is an initiative which was signed off by the DFT, and there are very strict rules on how the funding can be spent. So we can't spend BSIP money effectively to fund community transport to run similar innovative services in the way that you've described. It is quite challenging for people to understand, and it's also very challenging for local communities to create, with no expertise in bus operations, something which obviously is quite complex. And that was our role, to step in and try and help facilitate something which is locally driven, which was the key part of this initiative. So it's quite a mess, I agree with you, and quite complex and quite challenging for people to understand. I wouldn't disagree with any of that, but it was a specific strand of funding which was agreed upfront with the DFT, forms part of BSIP, and there are very strict rules as to how that money can be spent. And that was part of my job to evaluate those bids, and I did. I was part of the final decision process along with North Somerset Council, who jointly signed it off. And I am aware of how those bids were derived, why they were successful, and why two others, as Phil said just now, are currently being helped over the line, if that's the right way to try and describe it. So, and there may be more to come. So I think it's been taken out of context a little bit, but that's because people can't genuinely understand the difference between the one and the other.
There's a lot of confusion within community transport at the moment. I've got a quote here from England Director of Community Transport Association, who spoke to the Department of Transport and was very clear that BSIP funds could be used for an existing Section 9 services. So there's one thing coming directly from the Department of Transport and another thing on the rules. So there's a great confusion as to what BSIP can be used and can't be used for, because the community transport think it should be.
Yes, I agree, and I'm aware of that conflicting advice that I read about last week myself. So there's some clarification there on what can be done.
Mark. Then Ben, and then Alison, and then I think we're going to have to move. Well, I might have one question of my own, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. So I'm pleased that real-time information is a focus of this work, because we all agree the current system and the process for feeding updates leaves a lot to be desired, and it goes to the heart of passenger confidence, doesn't it? Really. Because if you go to the bus stop waiting for a bus that doesn't turn up and then the next one doesn't turn up, you actually lose faith in the process. So if you've got an alternative, let's face it, many people don't have an alternative. They will drive instead, or they're using another form of transport. But a particular issue is the consistency of real-time information between what's on the passenger screen in the shelter, if you're lucky enough to have a shelter, and the operator apps. So can that be a particular focus of what you're doing? That's question one, because then more people are getting their journey information via smartphones and apps. And I think it feeds in to the lack of faith that the bus is going to appear. If one says 2 minutes and the screen says it's been cancelled. So that's one. The second is the lack of shelters on some key routes. I'm not quite sure where this currently sits, but again, it's another part of the passenger experience, isn't it, really? Because if you've got a shelter, you've got a screen. Now, I know we can put screens onto flags, but it's not ideal. So the shelter, the screen, the timetable, the branding, and I do accept the need for the rebranding, is all part of the package. So is shelter replacement and actually putting shelters in where they currently don't exist, is that part of this deal as well? And my last question, because of the travel to work area is so extensive across the west of England area, is there a connector into the Western Gateway work as the subnational transport body? Because that's obviously massively important in looking at the wider picture. So just as for rail, does that also apply in the bus network as well? Because some of these routes will permeate across this wider region. And that's the end of my little list.
Thanks. And I'd actually like to just ask, when I saw RTI was getting more money, I was a bit worried that we may be rewarding a failing provider. So I don't know if that's part of what you might have been hinting at here, Mark, but you may or may not want to comment on that.
I think as far as the RTI issue goes, and I've been victim of it myself, where I've got an app telling me there's a bus here, and I'm standing there, and when they say ghost buses, literally, it's like, it's a ghost bus. I can't see it. It's telling me, the app's telling me it's here. You're right. We've got a multitude of different providers who the information comes from different sources and is input into that. One thing we have done in the short term is we've worked with First to put more people into their offices to ensure that they are updating when buses change, when services disappear. But the other thing I think that is really important to look at is we've got, and it's not part of this program, is what's called the MAS app, Mobility as a Service. It's part of the Future Transport Zone, which is, the theory of that is it will pull together all the different transport apps into one app, so that they're all interconnected. I can't give you the detail of it, I'm afraid, but that's what we are hoping will be part of this solution, because at the moment we rely on either a First app or City Planner, I think it's called, or one of the other apps. So that's, I think, the first question. I'm trying to remember the second. Sorry, apologies. So the actual physical infrastructure on shelters is part of a capital programme, which is the CRSTS programme. We're clearly working very closely with them to make sure that we align our information that we put onto those shelters in a way that works better for people. You're absolutely right. There are lots of places at the moment in the region we don't have shelters. We can't expect people to stand. The phrase always used, and it always makes it sound like I'm in a novel or something. On a windswept highway with on a dark winter's evening. Waiting for a bus and expect people to do that as a normal activity. So it's clearly part of the wider programme to ensure that we deliver a better network for people across the region. There's lots of hurdles to that. It's not easy, but it is something we are aware of and we're working on. And apologies. So I'm probably not in the best place to talk about the Western Gateway programme. The only thing I think I can add on that front is that I work with Somerset colleagues, Gloucestershire colleagues, Wiltshire colleagues to ensure that we try and come up with a coordinated approach to how we deliver, because there are a lot of services, especially with those three local authorities, transport authorities, that align. And I attend their EP meetings, or one of the officers will attend their EP meetings to ensure that we are working together in a coordinated way. I don't think there's any ifs and buts. We could be better at that, and there's things that we need to improve on. But those conversations do take place.
Very quickly, we're running out of time. So Ben and Alison.
Thanks, Ed. So my question is, will the BSIP refresh resubmission to the government be a WECA committee decision?
There's two things on that one. As I understand it, the next committee is after the submission date on the 12th of June, and we have to submit that. That's a hard deadline from Department of Transport. So we could go back to the committee, but we would have had to have submitted it prior to the next committee. So there's process we can potentially follow to look at how we could do that. But that's Department of Transport not being particularly helpful with the deadlines they give us. They don't think about our process. However, the reassurance I give you, and I think I've explained this, the EP process does include Highway Authority colleagues, part of that highway. So we will go through that process. We will work through the EP process, but also, more granular level, we'll be working with the officers below that. But I'm happy to have a conversation about whether we feel we should retrospectively go back to committee for that. I don't see any issues on that front.
I think the Metro Mayor is quite clear that he wants more political leadership in this programme, and I'm not going to take it any further than that. Alison.
I'll try and be brief, but it's good to go back to the West Local question and this entire system where bids come from parish councils who are volunteers in the community. They are not paid. They have usually no transport expertise at all. It's an interesting idea, put it no more than that. And I've asked my political question about that of the mayor. If you were here earlier, you may or may not have heard. But my urging or request to you is that these bids need the help of the unitary authority transport officers. They need the help of the people who know how it joins up with the next door ward. They know how it joins up with the park and ride that it's going to land in, and have this sort of segmented sort of approach through particular areas where there's no consultation with nearby ward officers or transport officers was unfortunate. And I would urge you to consider how that can be more broad in the future, so that Bob is nodding, he understands the point. So it is a sort of, it's not a sort of a scrutiny sort of, what are you doing? It's more, please, can we do this slightly better in the future?
I think the answer to that is we've been listening very closely to the conversations this morning, and the message has clearly dropped. So the answer to that is yes. Can I just go back very briefly to Westlink, because I was also listening this morning about the lack of liaison with the unitaries over the decision to change Westlink in April. Now, that decision was mine, operational decision. And the background to this is we launched it in April to a very dodgy start, to say the least. We hadn't really got enough evidence about how Westlink needed to be improved to meet the September service change. There's 2 service changes under our EP, September and April. And to have made a decision for September, I would have had to have come forward with recommendations as early as June, which is only 2 months after it had been launched. This April was the first opportunity we had to put some tangible improvements into Westlink. I've got 43 years of operation experience, and I think I'm fairly well placed to be able to say what needs to be done to improve Westlink. If it needs to be tweaked, we've got till next September to refine it. I promise I will go to the unitaries and liaise with my colleagues, fellow officers, to see what we need to do. But let's get something in and up and running to improve it now, rather than waste time and wait till September. And that was the whole reason for doing it. There was no underhand attempt to try and subjugate local due process. It was purely to get something up and running, which was needed to try and get Westlink on a more even keel. And the one thing we had to kill was the really long journeys across the region, which it wasn't designed to do that. And that's what the zones does. So I just wish to clarify that, because I thought there's a little bit of confusion about how that decision was made.
Bob, that's very brave of you and very good of you to come and front that up, and well done. I would ask that the information is out there as soon as possible, please, because this has been registered at the end of January. I have people still writing to me on a regular basis about the operation in my ward. I have nothing to tell them.
It's coming out Tuesday.
Okay. And I think a conclusion of this meeting is probably that the BSIP review needs to tackle West Local and think very hard about how we get the right expertise to support community volunteers, because I don't think we're quite happy. It just feels like it's not a nice set of cogs working together. It's rather disparate cogs. So I really hope the BSIP review will be thinking about how West Local, hopefully there'll be a bit of money left, but if not, it'll at least be experience for next time round. I'm going to thank you very much for coming along, and this is one of the more controversial things we're looking at. So thank you for coming and facing us. And I'm going to propose just a 5-minute break now for everyone, just a comfort break. It does mean we're going to have to be very disciplined and quite rapid when we look through the paperwork going to committee. So back here, well, ideally at 28 minutes past, but I think we may have to accept 1/2 and then we'll go through the committee papers. what remains on our agenda is review of the items going to the combined committee on Friday. So in my mind throughout this, I'm thinking about how I try and sum up anything back to the committee. We've got about half an hour for this, so we're going to have to be quite swift. I'm going to suggest that I'm going to assume that everyone's read the papers and that we're not going to take presentations from the officers, but we're going to dive straight into the detail, if that's okay with people. If people do need to ask questions to get themselves up to speed, then please make them quite targeted. So the first thing on the agenda is, I think, the transformation programme. This is obviously, yes, thank you, Jess. You've been leading on this. There is a report going to committee. I'm going to assume people have read it, so we're not going to have to. You're not going to have to take us through it, unless there's anything particularly you want to draw our attention to.
Well, so just to say, I suppose that the paper is headline the transformation programme, but it does, of course, reflect the best value notice that was received by the Combined Authority last week. I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that the best value notice focuses on a few of the issues that were already covered by the transformation programme, so that they're not new issues that we haven't been aware of, that we've all been aware of for some time. And the other thing that I should reflect from the paper is that it highlights that our intention to do the 1 year on review, which follows up the Solace report that we had at the beginning of this process in March last year. So we've commissioned Jim Taylor to come back and do a 1 year on review across the whole of the transformation programme, which will obviously include those elements highlighted by government, but will run across the rest of the programme as well, where I think it's fair to say that there has been significant progress, which is what is outlined in the paper. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
And I think a recurring theme from both me and Councillor Gollop, who's sitting in the gallery there, has been that we have consistently remarked that actually the transformation programme we feel is going well for all the things that are within the gift of officers, and but there's bits of this which are intensely political. And I think we have to be very careful that we've had our go at the political side of things, and now we need to focus, not direct any of the concerns at the officers here. Jeff, you've been here waiting patiently. I don't know if you want to come. I don't know if there's a roving mic anymore, but you might as well come up to the table. You've discussed this as audit committee. Actually, if anything, this is as much audit, if not more so, than scrutiny. So I think it'd be really good for you to just tell us where you're at in terms of being the chair of that committee.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. I think the first thing to say is that you're all very lucky that I wasn't sat at the table and I was sat over there, because I otherwise would have had so many points of order during the mayor's presentation. And I make the comment, not that they were political, but they were factual. So the whole issue about governance and the best value notice, as far as I was aware, the issues of dysfunctionality started in probably autumn 21, when I and your predecessor met with the mayor and talked through the concerns. We tried to facilitate using the LGA or some other source to come in and resolve the issues. The notes I'm planning to put to committee, just to put this in perspective, was that in March 23, the audit committee were talking about improving relationships and about the constitution. And we commented, without categoric confirmation the actions are happening, the action plan is only an attempt to placate auditors in audit committee. So it was only an attempt to placate the auditors in the audit committee, not actually to achieve anything. And again, your point, no criticism of the officer work on this. This is the political role. For the January 24 committee, a couple of months ago, we actually said at that point, and this was agreed cross-party, cross-authority at audit committee, that if we didn't take a lead on the constitution and the working together, it would be taken out of our hands. Now DLUC haven't gone that far, but they've identified and shared exactly the issues that the audit committee have been raising. It is a real frustration that we've just been ignored and patted on the head. And we find ourselves now receiving a notice which
we and Scrutiny have been saying was inevitable. I don't want to make a choice as to who's responsible, other than to say the political leaders in the form of the committee are the ones who can lead. The officers can't resolve the Constitution without clear direction. The officers cannot make the local authorities sit down and plan in advance if all the leaders won't turn up to the pre-meetings to work through. So these are the massively fundamental things that are the basic building blocks of the authority being functional and moving forward. So now the notice came out after the last audit committee, but all the comments that were made were actually from members that were just expressing sheer frustration that these actions weren't happening. So I think it's reasonable for me to assume that audit committee members will welcome the notice, because it may give some priority and attention to areas that were not being dealt with. So I think it's something that we should continue to find Scrutiny and Audit have a common view on, that the rest of the transformation is going ahead, but unless this leadership happens and we get resolution and we get it working together, it's very difficult to see how it is going to resolve.
Thank you, Jeff. We could now ask officers, how quickly you're going to set up this new board. What is going to be the relationship with the task and finish group? But I think actually what officers approved is when they're given a task, they get on with it and they deliver. And so we could ask about the speed and timing and everything. I mean, we've got the chance to ask questions, but I do think that we need to make some time to just send a very strong message out. And that's why I think Jeff has been here and is kind of be even more powerful if Audit and Scrutiny can speak with one voice.
I think, so, Ed, if I may, I think it's also, if we need an independent panel, we have to, because that's what's required. But it does seem a pity that Scrutiny and Audit members that have got involved in this process and are very aware of what the challenges are might be excluded from the process. So I would hope there are ways that members who've got that knowledge can be engaged.
Just behind you, Jess is wanting to come in on that. As soon as you said the involvement of Scrutiny.
So as you say, we need to establish an independent panel, but I think you're right that we want to ensure that the panel has the opportunity to hear from those that have been involved in the process previously. So I don't see any reason why one of the things that the panel might receive is a report to reflect on the kind of conversations that we've had in Audit and Scrutiny previously. Because I think that there's no point in them starting from the beginning, is there? The building on the experience we've had over the last 12 to 18 months makes sense to me, certainly.
Let's have a few questions and then let's have a few comments, and I'll try and put something together to share between now and Friday that we'll feedback.
So my questions, I'm going to give you the references without going into the detail, but it's page 31 of the document pack, and it's paragraph 29 little c and paragraph 30 little b, which is about the new forums for the revised decision-making advisory forums. I'm sure we would want to know what practically is proposed for those new forums. And in particular, in relation to the Constitution, I know that it was intended that Scrutiny should be involved with the revision of the Constitution. And I don't know really if this is the right forum to do this, but I'm going to make a request that we do have an interim monitoring officer who has excellent experience through his other work in other areas of constitutions and what takes place in other combined authorities. And we are faced with the risk that we might lose him halfway through the process, because I gather we are recruiting for a new monitoring officer. Could I please ask that we keep the expertise that we have in the excellent Dan Dickinson until we finish this process, rather than pass it on to someone who will not be familiar with the combined authority or the history, and we won't know whether or not the interviewing panel will, but we don't know who they are, what their experience is. But this is essential work which is taking place already, and it would be an awful shame to lose that momentum by having to change legal officers, I might suggest.
I think that's more. Was there a question in there?
It was more of a sort of please can we find out at some point, not necessarily now, about these new forums which are in those 2 paragraphs that I mentioned, which is the how the advisory how that all that advisory discussion is going to happen, what the forum is going to be for that, and what the process is for reviewing the constitution. So.
And I think there's a very clear steer here that we've been looking at this and worried about it for, well, years, even certainly months, and we feel we've got a lot to contribute to any independent. We wanting to come in, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably worth saying that our sort of first meeting with the officials from DLUC, from the department, is due to take place possibly just before we have the committee on Friday or soon afterwards, if not really. So we will get a better feel for exactly how they are thinking about how we would operate. My assumption will be they'll take some of that learning that they've had from Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, which have had a best value notice in place probably for about 13 months now. They had a 12-month notice that was extended for a further 6 months about a month ago. So I suspect they'll take some of the learning from there. But look, we would be really keen that not only perhaps they receive reports, but I would expect the chair, the independent chair, and possibly independent members to want to have presentations from and conversations with those to sort of hear some of the ways that we can help move this forward in a positive way. And you would hope that this is a way for us to do that, notwithstanding the many challenges that exist around areas such as the constitution as well. It's probably worth saying just in relation to Dan Dickinson, I share the view. I think he's excellent, as I have said to his face on too many times as well. His contract with us is until the end of July, as is mine. We're out to recruit. There are 11 members of the corporate leadership team. 9 of them are permanent. The 2 that aren't, and it's really important that we do get permanent people for both of those roles. So we're in process. And again, the leaders and currently the mayor of Bristol or his representative are involved on the employment panel throughout that process. It's possible we will conclude the offers on those, all being well, towards the end of April. It's really important that we make sure we've got that representative across all 3 of the unitary authorities and the mayor, who will obviously chair the employment committee for both those roles.
Does anyone else want to come in here? Hal?
Last, I think it was the time before, we heard from Officer Salmon that you were bringing in extra staff to, I think, look at the payments and also project leadership of this transformation program. Am I right?
No, that's in relation to the at the last committee. There was a comment made by the mayor to refer it to ONS to have an overview of the grants process, and particularly in respect to change requests. I've commissioned that internal audit now on Scrutiny's behalf, and they will look at the timetable of that from the new financial year as part of the new plan. But it is built into the plan. It's not part of the transformation programme. It's part of the internal audit plan, which will be reported back to audit committee.
And I think, are we clear how we can judge the success of this programme?
Should we bring Pete Davis up in a few minutes, because that's probably more about programme governance than kind of overall governance.
I guess it's just clarifying if you mean the success of that grant programme, or if you mean of the success of the transformation programme.
Yeah, well, both actually.
Okay,
but-
so the grants process will be reviewed in terms of the robustness of the change request process will be reviewed by internal audit, and that will provide confidence or not back through to ONS and audit committee once that internal audit report concludes. But the transformation programme is a different
different game.
Do you want me to say something about success of that? So I suppose there are two things, aren't there? Now that we have the best value notice in place, success on those specific elements of the transformation programme that are under the best value notice will clearly be measured by getting out of the best value situation. So if the notice is in place for 12 months, it's possible the government could remove it earlier if they're convinced of progress, or they could extend it. So the success will be measured by getting out of that circumstance. The wider transformation programme, as I mentioned, we've got 1 year on review from Jim Taylor from Solace, who will be looking at progress against all the other elements of the transformation programme. So he will provide us with an assessment of how we've done there, and then we can see where the focus needs to be going forward.
Thank you.
Jeff.
Yeah, and one thing I thought worthy just to mention as well is one of the issues raised in the original Grant Thornton Value for Money report was an issue about strategy and purpose. And we're now 16 months on, and the leaders have allocated, as I understand it, an hour to meet to discuss strategy and purpose. And yet that will seem to be one of the fundamental requirements of the process, which is clearly key part of the improvement notice as well. So I just mentioned that. And perhaps though another thing linking on from Hal's comment, and this is more specific to BSIP, where audit committee looked at it, but was the comments that key performance indicators on proposals should be designed in such a way that one can monitor and identify how we are performing as we go. Rather than having to look at the figures, and linked into that, the reports on how we progress on different projects tend not to go back to the committee, because the committee is so busy with the full agendas that it has every quarter that there isn't time to look at reports on how things are progressing. So again, there's not the level of political insight, if you like, into how things are performing. So that all fits into the process. It may change as the organisation grows and employs more people to be part of the process, but getting those principles right at the first stage and having sufficient indicators to measure how you're going and spot when things are going wrong should prevent a project to needing to be running for almost 12 months before it's being concerned. So that's something perhaps if members share that view, you might emphasise as well, because it seems pretty fundamental, and you can't scrutinise a project if you actually haven't got key performance indicators to scrutinise it against.
Shall I do the best job I can at the moment of summing this up, and then I'll put it in writing and share it around everyone during the week before Friday. So actually, audit, and I think we welcome the notice, because it's the wake-up call that for some time we've been saying is going to happen, and unfortunately it's disappointing but not unsurprising, I think is the best way to describe it. We urge the mayor actually to turn up to the pre-meetings and to do the work behind the scenes, because that appears not to be happening. And this idea that you don't do business in smoke-filled rooms, except when the committee meets, you all disappear off to a private room to try and hash out agreements, doesn't seem to be the best way of doing it. We really would advise all the leaders to make use of the mediation and support that's being offered, and I think that's a key thing. And I think we all agree there's a need for a reset. We want the independent panel ideally to have some involvement of scrutiny and audit as contributors and observers, and that we would like to sort of make some suggestions. We look forward to seeing what's proposed for the new forums and advisory panels, because they don't appear to be working, and they should be the real engine room of the combined authority. Whoops. And now I've just lost my thing because of technology. we would like the current monitoring officer to download as much possible information before he goes, and possibly even to be retained after the event if the timetable demands it. We note there's going to be learning from Cambridge and Peterborough, which we're all happy. I think we would like, there's going to be a task and finish group proposed already to look at the Constitution by Scrutiny members. And I think they're saying that this should carry on anyway. And we hope that if we can do it in a rapid and agile enough way, then we'll be feeding in to the whole process. And lastly, we think that overall, the committee should be looking much more at performance, ongoing performance issues, and looking at monitoring KPIs and doing that in a public way. Even if it's a very constrained part of the committee meeting, at least it gets the performance and progress that the combined authority is making out into the open for public scrutiny, even if it's a brief thing. And that's probably not only looking at transformation program and everything else, but every program being run. Understanding how well those things are going, and particularly where WECA is a commissioning authority for the unitary authorities to deliver. Is that about right? Is there anything I've missed? Okay, well, I'll try and make it brief and succinct so that it's really hard-hitting when it comes to committee, but that's the best I can do at the moment. Thank you, Jess. The next thing I thought we could probably, I hope people will agree that improvements of governance in terms of a code of conduct and a complaints procedure were pretty much relying on a well-experienced monitoring officer who's basically derived everything from LGA good practice. And I don't think there's an enormous amount to comment on, other than it's high time and much needed that it's a constitutional legal requirement and it's not in place. So well done for closing that loop. Would anyone like to add anything to that? Should we move on to employment and skills? Stephen, hi. And sorry, may need an introduction to who's accompanying you.
Hi everyone, it's my colleague Henry Laws.
Hi, so Henry and Stephen. Again, I'm going to assume that people have had at least a look at the papers. Are there any particular questions about this? I've got one. Well, actually, I've got two, which is, so I'll ask them both. One is, I noticed that EDI, in terms of diversity, we're really not doing great in terms of making sure some of these apprentices and other offers go out to all people, particularly disabled and I think more diverse communities. How are we going to really step up our action on that? And the second is, could you just explain the significance of the 2 years? Because it looks like an extremely good move, and I think that's actually a real kind of new part of the investment fund. So if you could just explain what's behind that, because I struggled to sort of really grasp the significance of it.
Okay, I'll answer the second question, then Henry, perhaps you could answer the other question. So on the 2 years, we set out the fund as a 3-year fund with the outputs associated with 3 years of delivery. But given the limits on the headroom at the moment, the fact that we're going through a gateway review and we're waiting for confirmation of future rounds of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, it's felt that this was a good way of keeping the momentum going on key services that are funded through this fund, like Future Bright and other things, but also giving us that checkpoint after 2 years where we can come back and review where we are, rather than making that 3-year commitment. That's something that the mayoral combined authority and unitary authorities were all supportive of in terms of doing an initial allocation of 2 years. But we'd hope to come back positively and make the case for more, because as we set out in the paper, this is about continuing momentum, but keeping that expertise and knowledge that's been built up over a number of years. And the shorter the delivery period, the more risk there is to that resource. But we think this is a sweet spot where we're able to continue services for a couple of years, but then have that review and checkpoint, which enables us to come back and make the case for more when it's a bit clearer, the context is a bit clearer.
Henry, do you want to?
So just effectively, you'd be able to let 2-year contracts, which is a good thing, but with the probability of a third to come.
Absolutely.
Sorry, for your question, you're asking about how the fund will support underrepresented communities. So there's a range of provision that's supported in the core services already, which does focus on underrepresented communities and underrepresented participation in education and skills. The employment skills plan particularly looks at that both at pre-19 and post-19 as well. Some of the funding services like the We Work for Everyone is an SEND direct employment support service, so it's supporting people with special educational needs. In terms of access, where we have flexible funding, we try to enable a diverse range of organisations, as diverse as possible, to apply for that funding as well, and all of the documentation is accessible in that nature too. So there's a brief response.
Okay, so if we're having regular performance.
So as a region, actually, our disability employment gap versus other regions is better, but that may well be in part because of the focus that has been put both on a local and a regional level on supporting particular groups.
Just a brief point. I couldn't see in the paper, and perhaps I just haven't found it, the support for people who want to start up on their own and will acquire skills through that journey, rather than the more traditional route of going to work or looking for work with a particular employer and gaining skills for that process. And I know that in some parts of Bristol in particular, where there's fairly low education attainment, traditional routes to work don't really work particularly well or haven't functioned particularly well, the self-employment route is often preferred. So is there a segment of this that would support those people wanting to do that?
Yeah, I think the best way to answer that is that this is the Employment Skills Fund. It's not in isolation. So there are a number of other services that work around this across the economy and skills activity in the combined authority. So we have business support programs through the Growth Hub, for example. So what we'd hope is that where individuals are being supported for this program, as well as having access to the direct support here, they can also be referred to other opportunities as well. And if that's self-employment, to be able to utilise support through various other programs that are happening both regionally and also at local level as well.
So the money is effectively delegated by the committee for 2 years into this fund. And I'm just kind of wondering, how do we monitor this as it's being delivered? Is there any kind of dashboard that is available for us to understand how your targets are being met or not met?
So I'll have a go at that. Henry might want to fill some of the gaps. So ultimately, this fund is about delivering the employment and skills plan, which has a set of KPIs, which will ultimately, this is delegated. There'll be a business case that will need to come in and be agreed, and that will set out in detail how each of the services programs will deliver against those outputs. So they'll be then monitored on a regular basis, reported back out through the directors groups, the chief executives, but also committee as well at the review point. So yeah, you've got the employment skills plan, which sets the high level metrics. Through the business case development, there'll then be more specific outputs which will be tracked regularly.
So would it be possible though to have that formulated in just a really simple dashboard in terms of those achievements?
Yeah, absolutely. We can do that.
can stop this thing working.
If you look at the so the committee paper sets out in the appendix some of the dashboards that we're currently using, KPIs we're using, so we can do something very similar. I'm very happy for that to also come to this group as we progress.
I'm glad the computer agrees with me that it's going to be easy to use.
Papers have been read. Excellent work.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Roger, I have a couple of questions, if that's okay. Also fantastic to read about the progress in all these different areas, and it does feel very unfair to be asking sort of, you know, questions about speed and ambition to the people who are doing the work, as opposed to not. But anyway, I had a few things. I've actually got quite a few things, so I'll only raise a couple of issues. On the nature recovery piece, how does WECO engage? Well, there's so many things I want to ask about measurement, but how does WECO engage with farmers in its area and DEFRA and SFI and the story of habitat and biodiversity there? I imagine there's all kinds of mechanisms to not double count. Do you do any showcasing and incentivizing of farmers to sort of get on board with that? And does your toolkit help measure biomass and species recovery in that context?
Right, first question. So how we engage with farmers. So I think our engagement with farmers facilitated through the local nature recovery strategy has been really, really positive. That the local nature recovery strategy, through its structure, demanded that actually we looked at both residents, business and landowners as key sectors to engage. So we've done extensive engagement with landowners. Through our support of the West of England Nature Partnership, there is a landowner subgroup that we attend as support on a regular basis. And through levelling up funding, we're also funding the development of business cases for landscape scale and farm cluster work to ensure that actually we start working and grouping landowners to enable that kind of conversation about what would stimulate them and encourage them to do the right thing by nature recovery, what's their incentives, what's their, you know, what their motivations are, and then linking that in to government kind of opportunity. Your second question, I think, was around how do we avoid double counting? Very complicated and hard thing to do. I think from our perspective, we've got a real developing momentum in this space, which is incredibly positive. And one aspect, as we improve and strengthen our corporate reporting and performance management, I think actually how we assess our progress in this area will be key. And I say we haven't got that set yet, but I think that there are a number of charities working brilliantly, particularly in South to look at a landscape scale kind of response, and we've got great traction, I think, there from DEFRA in terms of identifying the first landscape scale land management project outside of a protected nature reserve. So farmers will be absolutely critical to making that work, and so working with those charities as part of our approach to nature recovery will be key.
Fantastic. And then I'd asked about, yeah, maybe we don't need to go into too much detail on this now, given the timing. Can I ask you one question on a different topic, which is on the climate resilience bit, and how can you save yourselves work by looking at where this is already being done in, other core cities, etc., rather than you're looking at similar sorts of issues, aren't you? Heat and flooding.
Absolutely. You must have been reading my emails to my teams. So I think at the moment, we've seen London do a big piece on climate resilience. Today, I've just been, last week, I think, the European Union published their climate resilience, climate impacts work and looking at kind of core risks. For the past 15 years, actually, the amount of investment in understanding risks for cities and regions around the world it's been incredible. So absolutely, we shouldn't start from a blank page. I think what I've asked to do is there's a few key reports that are really relevant to us. A couple of councils and regions around the country are a bit advanced in us on this, taking their risk review, testing that with our regional stakeholders as a starting point so that we can jump a number of places, but making sure that those risks are relevant to our region. So I agree with you entirely, and that is part of the plan.
Brilliant. Right, I'll stop if I should.
So in the paper, I think there's towards the end, there's a piece about scaling our investment. So I hope to come and talk to you again between now and June committee about our proposals in that space. I think at June committee, we really need to have a conversation that sets out the opportunity for us to scale and what that means for our funding as a whole, as a region. We have got multiple priorities. This is, climate and nature is at the core of how we're able to respond to those pieces, both from a benefit for our residents, from a resilience for our economy perspectives. So thinking about how we take those risks and scale those opportunities, what I want to set out is a series of packages that are being developed or available so we can start thinking about larger scale investment. But there is a lot of complexity to that, and I want to take the next 2 or 3 months to look at that, to see how we do scale our investment.
We could spend an awful lot of time on this, and I'm sorry that we're running out of time. So I think going to leave it at that, and really look forward to seeing the carbon accounting measures coming through as well, because that's going to be critical to underpinning this throughout all the activities.
Great, thank you.
Did people want to talk about the investment fund and the delivery assurance? I mean, no. The one thing I wasn't clear about is what is the digital office? I couldn't quite understand what it is. I don't know if anyone can tell us about that. Pete, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, unfortunately, Jess has just left, hasn't she, who would be able to give you chapter and verse. But the notion is to pull together resource to help deliver the digital plan, the recently improved digital plan. So it's a set of coordinated activities working with the industry authorities, looking at telecoms providers to help deliver the targets in the digital plan. And within the investment fund report, there's some tabulated information about what those targets are and the support that this office will provide in pursuing those targets.
Thanks. That was a lovely succinct answer. Is there any other questions about this? I note that there's some quite significant variations in Bristol's CRSTS, Bath, Somervale, and Network Rail. Really don't. There seem to be some very significant additional funds and cost overruns. Are you confident that those programs are still on track and still going to be delivering good value for money?
Yes, it's a good point, and we had this discussion at the recent portfolio review board, and perhaps it would be useful in future reports to make it clearer when there is an instance where a cost has actually increased, and in the situation for the CRSTS programme where the additional funding is drawing down on the allocations agreed for those schemes or corridors. So it's probably the wording isn't as helpful to you as it could be in terms of the schemes which are progressing to the next expected phase of work and are therefore drawing down those allocated funds, as opposed to schemes which are encountering unforeseen challenges which are having cost implications.
It's good, because it looked like it was a bad news story, but actually it's a good news story that they're progressing. Okay, so hard to work out which one was which, to be honest. Okay, thanks. And then the other thing I think we should note and we're pleased about is that there's an internal audit looking at the whole delivery assurance, because I think it's a really difficult thing to prove. We know that in a program this big and this complicated, things will go over budget, things will go over time. And you could be doing all the delivery assurance in the world, and it's going to be very hard to prove the fact that it could have been worse without that delivery assurance. So we look forward to an internal audit to see if there's any particular things that we could do even better, I think. Okay, we're getting to the end. Budget. I was very pleased to see that where there's a significant variations, it's because we've managed to get more income in and we're investing it. And that's probably the biggest single thing. I was a bit worried about it does look like the capital programme slipping and the capital recharge is not on track. And there was a comment somewhere in there saying we're clarifying the expectations around capital recharge. Is that within the combined authority or with partners?
That will be for any of the capital spend that goes through the combined authority books. But yes, there is slippage on the capital programme. We know that that's being addressed through different avenues in terms of the directors group as well as through PRB. In terms of that's why the rigour on the change request particularly is really important in terms of establishing that, because sometimes those changes are coming through retrospectively. So it's not necessarily a request for a change in advance of this is when a programme might slip. So it is a reprofiling over different years. So we're very alert to those issues that are arising across all projects and programmes.
And Jonathan is often the person who will spot any problems, and he says that really this is just normal, isn't it? That capital programmes always slip, and otherwise very happy. So that's pretty good note of endorsement.
Just to comment though, it may be common. I don't think we should tolerate it. I think we absolutely should drive to not be with the norm, because actually it is a common problem in local government generally, but actually the delivery of our projects and programmes is so critical to our success as an organisation. We really must get ahead of that to make sure we deliver what we say we're going to on time and on budget.
Especially when quite a lot of this is time-limited government funding with a cliff edge. Any other comments about the budget? Ben?
I've probably missed it in the report, but what's the plan for the 800k surplus? Where's that going to go?
That's a withheld budget element that was required, so it falls into reserves through the actual accounting. We do have a further 800 that was also withheld in the budget for 24-25. So in terms of the process for releasing that, we are in train for that to take a programme to CEOs as requested by January committee. But in terms of this 800, it essentially flows through our reserves.
And you effectively absorbed that then? I'm not quite sure.
Well, the 800 is underspent, yeah. So it's therefore shown as a surplus. But in terms of it goes into our reserves, which was very necessary because we were far below the minimum threshold for reserves. So this helps us in that respect. But it's critical that we release the budget for 24-25 in order that we have the appropriate staffing the organisation needs.
And that leaves us with one other thing. Sorry, colleagues. The LEP. I think we could probably just say that we're disappointed to see that the deadline for new arrangements for the LEP was not met, and that really I think we're assuming that this is now wrapped up in the entire transformation process, and that will be part of it. And we don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say about that.
No, I mean only briefly. So the position we've reached really, which is, we have to close the LEP down because government funding, which I think is something like 240 or 140,000. Rachel will tell me which one of those it is for this coming financial year. Until we agree how we're going to work the business board across the region, it is likely government will withhold that sum of money. and I think that's a lever to help get agreement. The position at the moment is that North Somerset, who are currently within that LEP boundary, and we are different from others in that it isn't coterminous with the mayoral combined authority area, and we've not been able to reach agreement on the position of North Somerset. I've written to the Secretary of State to say that we've not been able to reach agreement, and we're waiting for a response back from the Secretary of State. It's fair to say our mayor's also written to the Secretary of State, and also Mike Bell, who's the leader of North Somerset, has written with his position as well, and they are supported in different ways by the different unitary authorities, Bristol and Bath North East Somerset and South Gloucester. So the positions are not unanimous, it's fair to say. So I've written to the Secretary of State to say this is a position we've reached at, and for us to have that conversation and potential direction on what we do next.
And is it safe to say that it may well be part of this new response to the letter?
I mean, it's certainly possible that it could get wrapped up within that. It's not, it's also possible the Secretary of State may take a view in respect to that unique specific issue in its own right outside of that process as well. So I think all options are possible at the moment.
Watch this space, I guess. Is there any other comments on that? I'm going to apologise profusely for having overrun by 15 minutes to everyone around the table and everyone in the gallery there. So I'm very sorry. That's a first. I think last time we managed 5 minutes, and so do apologise. I will be writing up some notes. I'm going to try and keep them a little bit briefer than I maybe have done in the past. So please do comment on them. I'll try and get them out as soon as possible with a clear deadline for responses. Thank you all. Quite a lot exhausting meeting, but I think we've covered a lot of ground, and thank you for all for participating. And thank you especially to officers for having the patience to go, particularly some of the officers who come right at the end, for having the patience with us to sit through the whole darn thing. And actually, on another note, this is our last meeting as currently formed. So for those of you in Bristol restanding, I wish you all the best of luck, and I hope to see you all on the other side. I am going to be interested to see how Scrutiny won't be meeting before the next committee meeting. There's some quite fundamental decisions, I think, coming to the next meeting. So we do need to think about if there's some way of organising something, some input from Scrutiny, because hopefully by June, we'll at least know what the composition of the new committee will be, and it may be that we could have some sort of informal meeting. Okay, thanks.